Chapter 19:15. Silver hair mixed with his sideburns, and fishtail-like wrinkles bloomed on both sides of his eyes. Accompanied by the sunset battle god smile, the loose skin on his face gathered to form the word command on both sides of his nose, giving off a solemn feeling. He didn't have the high-spirited and arrogant spirit of a youth. Traces of the vicissitudes of life could be seen all over his body. Zhan Wu was old. Even the sunset battle god respected by the five realms couldn't withstand the wind and frost of the great Tao. Today, you return to the sunset peak, and I am happy in my heart. However, as a brother, why did you lead the troops here? Zhan Wu interrogated. Qin Hao's gaze swept across the vast lineup of battle god guards. Naturally, he saw Ning Tianxing, who had escaped from Ning Wu, and the white-haired old man with a long beard. Xianyuan Wutian. Qin Hao's expression darkened. Had he been hiding in the sunset peak all this time? This was indeed the most suitable place for him to hide. And I don't have to pretend to be ignorant. Today, many of the emperors and old friends of the five realms are here. The Vajra Institute in the south, the Seven-Star Herb Institute in the east, and the Jixia Academy in the east are also watching. Don't you owe me an explanation for what happened back then? Qin Hao asked rhetorically. The monks of the Vajra Institute, the Herb Institute, and the Jixia Academy all stood in the distance. They had no intention of stepping forward to enter the array. Obviously, they weren't the sunset battle god's helpers. What happened back then? Zhan Wu raised his eyebrows and silently repeated. Outside the buried god temple, I was trapped in the nine heavens god's punishment array. My large body was destroyed, but you and Han Lingxian were unharmed. All these years, one of you ruled the Daqin territory alone, and the other built the battle god temple at the sunset peak. Empress Lingxian, the sunset battle god, who in the five realms dares to disrespect you? You really are my good brothers. Qin Hao sneered. Zhan Wu was silent. If you say that you have your own difficulties, then I believe you. But Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, and the others are innocent. Why did you kill the four of them and implicate so many people? Also, Wei Wei's father, Mu Xinjiao, the weapon immortal of Donghai, and the tens of thousands of old and young of the Mu clan. How did they offend you? Shouldn't you have an explanation for all these? Qin Hao bellowed. Then, he pointed at Ning Tianxing and Xianyuan Wutian. Qin Hao's expression turned even colder. And these two people, you gathered them here. What's going on? Ning Tianxing and Xianyuan Wutian were Qin Hao's greatest enemies. If I hand them over to you to deal with, will you be able to calm Denda's anger and let the Tao ancestor, Shadowless, and the others leave? Zhan Wu said. Sunset war god. Xianyuan Wutian suddenly looked at Zhan Wu, his eyes extremely sharp. What about Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, Uncle Mu, and Zhan Yi, who was detained here by you? Qin Hao shouted. Did they think that was the end? Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, and Xin Yue wanted to kill me. Should I stretch my neck and let them kill me? As for Mu Xinjiao, I can let him go and bring them here because of our relationship. Zhan Wu ordered. Suddenly, with the sound of heavy iron chains being dragged, a miserable body with many penetrated bones was dragged out by several war god guards and floated beside the sunset war god. In an instant, the Tao ancestor, Emperor Bai, Zhuing Sword Emperor, Ancestral Patriarch Dao Hai, and many emperors of the East Continent were stunned and their hearts trembled. The top weapon immortal of the East Continent, Weapon Emperor Mu, who had been so popular that many emperors went to beg for the divine soldier, had been reduced to such a miserable state. He was crippled. Father. In the North Region Army, Mu Yue's heart clenched. Mu Xinjiao's hair was messy and his body was covered in blood. His aura was extremely weak, and his limbs and shoulder blades were pierced by thick iron chains. His emperor body was crippled. Traces of divine platinum dilly flowed along the iron chains and flowed to the sunset mountain, nourishing the mountain. Just like the rumors said, Zhan Wu had used Emperor Will to nourish the mountain. Qin Hao, Wei Wei, don't worry about me, and don't talk nonsense with Zhan Wu, this heartless beast. Just kill him. Mu Xinjiao was like a pile of mud, suspended in the void by 6 iron chains. The other end of each iron chain was held by a war god guard. Zhan Wu. Mu Yue's heart ached as if she had been pierced by a sharp knife. Majestic Emperor Wu rolled around her, and she wanted to kill the sunset war god. Don't be rash. Uncle Mu is still in Zhan Wu's hands. Qin Hao grabbed Mu Yue's shoulder. After being tortured like this, Uncle Mu was like a cripple. He couldn't resist at all. The 6 war god guards holding the iron chains only needed to pull gently, and he would be torn apart. Young master, Qin Hao, you guys go. Don't worry about us. Xing'er and Yao Lao were also brought out by the war god guards. However, compared to Emperor Mu, the two were not injured. Perhaps their cultivation was too low, so Zhan Wu didn't bother to teach them a lesson. It was in line with his style. I can let them go. Ning Tianxing and Xinyuan Wutian can be handed over to you. As long as you let the people behind you go back to where they came from, we can even be brothers. In the East Continent, we are on equal footing. Zhan Wu said. Qin Hao's heart was beating rapidly. He had witnessed the fate of Mu Yue's father, as well as Xing, and Yao Lao being in Zhan Wu's hands. With a single thought, 3 lives could be wiped out in front of him. How could he not be nervous? However, he couldn't just let it go. At this moment, Zhang Guang, he saw Xing and Yao Lao being brought out by the war god guards. However, he didn't see Zhang Yi. He couldn't help but shout, "Where's Zhang Yi? Where's my great-great-grandson?" Thump! Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and the others felt their hearts skip a beat. That's right. Where is Zhang Yi? Back then, he was taken away from God Burial Valley by Zhang Lu, logically speaking. He should be detained here like Xing and Yao Lao. Why didn't he see Zhang Yi? You mean that brat with a rather sturdy body and a rather stubborn temper? He was too undisciplined and accidentally died. Zhan Wu said casually. Boom! Zhang Guang, his mind seemed to explode as he froze on the spot. Zhang Ye's father, Zhan Wenjie, suddenly turned pale. He staggered and lost his footing. He felt the world spin, and he nearly fainted. Was Zhang Yi dead? You? Zhang Guang, he roared as he released his 9 emperor rings at the same time. An extremely intense Emperor Dao radiance flowed around his body. When he raised his palm high, it was like a peerless saber. Saber intent that contained a torrential fury filled the air as it slashed toward Zhan Wu's head. Guang He! Qin Hao roared loudly. His voice was like a heavenly voice that caused Zhang Guang He's action to freeze midway. My son, Zhan Wenjie, felt as though his heart had been dug out by someone. He couldn't help but cry. Their parting back then had become an eternal parting. He had failed to fulfill his responsibility as a father. He had let Zhang Yi down. He's not very obedient. Instead of leaving him to cause trouble, it's better to end it once and for all. I'm sorry. Zhan Wu twisted his fingers and stretched his muscles as he chuckled nonchalantly. Big brother, Zhang Yi can't die for nothing. Yi Shuihan and the others stepped forward at the same time and stuck close to Qin Hao's back. Their eyes were red as they stared at the sunset battle immortal. This person was too arrogant. Phew! Qin Hao let out a suppressed breath. Was Zhang Yi dead just like that? In the end, he was still implicated by Dendi. Release Uncle Mu, Xing, and Yao Lao. Hand over Ning Tian and Xinyuan Wutian. Also, let the murderer of Zhang Yi pay with his life. If you do that, I can promise you that I will dismiss the Emperor Lords of the North region, including Feng Hua. Of course, other than that, you need to tell me who the 12 people who participated in the Valley of the Gods were, and who was behind the scenes. Qin Hao gritted his teeth and said, Are you joking with me? Zhan Wu pretended to be surprised. That brat Zhang Yi died under my hands. According to what you said, I have to pay with my life. As for the 12 murderers, forgive me for not being able to tell you, because I don't know. Then why are you still talking nonsense with me? Qin Hao suddenly clenched his fists. A thunderous boom exploded in the void. Brother, you have to consider carefully. You didn't want to return to the Sunset Peak. You didn't want to be the East Continent's Dendi and insisted on breaking ties with me. Is it worth it? Zhan Wu said softly. Qin Hao, I'll leave Wei Wei to you. Zhan Wu died. Without waiting for Qin Hao to speak, Mu Xinjiao, whose body had been pierced by the 6 iron chains, suddenly released a monstrous emperor light from his mud-like body. It formed a mighty storm and stirred up the turbulent Dilly. The 6 winding iron chains waved wildly and broke free from the hands of the war god guards. They pierced toward the sunset battle god like sharp thorns. Have a safe journey. The sunset battle god looked over with a cold expression. His voice echoed in the void. It was unclear whether he said this deliberately for Qin Hao and the others to hear, or for Mu Xinjiao himself. Zhan Wu's palm was aimed at Mu Xinjiao across the void. A layer of light emerged. He suddenly clenched his fists. The emperor's will resonated with the life shackles. It was as if he had injected a surge of heavenly might. The chains rolled back one after another and pierced into Mu Xinjiao's body like vicious snakes. They twisted into a ball on the spot. Ah Wu, thank you for your hard work, Mu Xinjiao murmured. Mu Xinjiao murmured. Even though his face was filled with hatred, his soul had been liberated at this moment. Boom! An astonishing loud sound burst out, and countless broken iron chains were shattered. The Punlai weapon immortal body was dead. Space was still at this moment. Countless people looked over in shock. Even the abbot of the Vajra Academy and the palace lords of Jixia Academy, who were watching the battle from afar, were shocked. Mu Xinjiao was dead. At this moment, Mu Yue also looked over in shock. As countless iron chains fell, her father disappeared before her eyes. In the next moment, a heart-wrenching scream erupted from the North Territory Army. It was like a huge wave surging violently. Layer by layer, it shook the first divine peak of the East Continent. Mu Yue broke free from Qin Hao's grasp. Like a streak of light, she pierced through space and charged toward Zhan Wu. I'll deal with her. At this moment, one of the 4 figures standing behind Zhan Wu moved. He was known as one of the most mysterious 4 unblemished cultivators of the divine martial hall. Like a wind controller, his aura merged with the heavenly path. He was also extremely fast. Under the shocked expressions of countless people, this person used Dinda's unique technique, the water wind step. In an instant, he collided with Mu Yue, who had turned into a beam of light. Chapter 1916. Translator, Nyoibo, Studio Editor. Nyoibo, Studio meeting a strong enemy bang. Rumble. As if the heavens had collapsed, a beam of light erupted between the Sunset Peak and the North Territory Army. Everyone saw the light first, and then they heard a deafening roar. Even though the distance was so close, the transmission of sound was still faster than the transmission of light. The flawless heavenly emperor used human strength to channel the momentum of the heavenly Tao into the emperor technique, and the power of the explosion was terrifying. When the aftermath radiated out, whether it was the 30,000 war god guards or the various overlords of the North Territory, they all felt a shock in front of them. If it weren't for the powerhouses on both sides holding the fort in front, those with low cultivation would have been directly torn apart by the aftermath of this Tao will. Even peak-stage human emperors and even lower-level emperors couldn't escape. Suddenly, the disciples of Fenghua sect, White Yuexian, Zhuiying Sword Palace, Sword Sect, Thunderpool Palace, and many other sects retreated in horror. Mu Yue let out a muffled groan. Her forward figure was blocked, and she slid back for a distance. Even though she had stepped into the flawless emperor technique, she could feel that the other party's cultivation was superb. Wind. At this time, the powerhouse from the divine martial hall, who blocked Mu Yue, reported his emperor title. Qin Hao's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the wind. This person's movement technique was water wind divine flash. In his previous life, he was sworn brothers with Zhan Wu, and Shaolou skills were taught by Dindi and the sunset battle god. Among the war god guards, there was naturally no lack of other people who cultivated Dinda's secret techniques. But Qin Hao was still surprised. Putting aside their standpoints, this person's attainments in the fleet footsteps were extraordinary, and he was no weaker than the battle tower. As expected of the strongest person from the divine martial hall under the sunset battle god. This talent was rare in the 4 regions. Those who stop me die. Mu Yue spat out an extremely cold voice. A cold light bloomed in her palm, and a sword appeared, flowing with the dazzling brilliance of an emperor artifact. This sword was her father's proud masterpiece. Although it wasn't as old as the phoenix flower's sacred object, the dream branch, which had been passed down for a long time and had been nurtured by the Tao intent of several phoenix flower sovereigns, allowing it to stir up the momentum of a world, its material was definitely not inferior to any supreme emperor artifact. Holding her father's work in her hand, Mu Yue's body surged with emperor's light. Traces of sacred radiance flowed as countless dense sword shadows flew from her wrist, turning into a dense whistling light that swept towards the divine martial hall's wind warrior. Boom! Vibrations could be heard in the void as the wind cultivator's body technique shifted, appearing in different locations without a trace. He relied on his water wind steps to dodge the rain of swords. As he opened his palms, waves after waves of emperor light pierced through the void towards Mu Yue. A seedling planted in a potted plant will sooner or later devour another seedling for the same sunlight. No matter how perfect a broken mirror is, it still can't close the crack. Hundreds of years of brotherhood have come to this stage today. You and I are ultimately standing on different sides. That's fine. Then let's kill. Zhan Wu's voice carried a hint of sadness. He and Qin Hao had been together for more than several hundred years. The primordial origin, the beginning of the primordial chaos, the divine world, the mortal realm, the outer realm, the divine wilderness, several reincarnations. Qin Hao really didn't care about him. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't sad, but he couldn't blame Dendi, who asked him to lose his memories and become an incomplete soul. Then, Zhan Wu raised his hand and waved it forward. Kill. Boom. On the sunset peak, 30,000 divine guards moved. Kuei Han's wild eyes released a bloodthirsty bloodlust. With a boom, his body, which was covered in a sinister green armor, shot out from his original position. A terrifying fist radiance blasted towards the North Territory Army. The sky was filled with violent lightning power. Seeing this, Shou Wup pressed down with his sword finger, wanting to release the power of the sword calamity. Kuei Han has been famous for a long time. He is crazy about martial arts and is the strongest and most terrifying person among the Sunset Peaks commanders. This person has a violent nature. Rumor has it that he even dares to disobey the orders of the Sunset Battle God. Logically speaking, the Emperor Lord of the East Continent, who is equally famous, should fight him. I will go. Zhu Ying's Sword Emperor pulled Wuck and stepped out first. As the monstrous lightning struck, he pointed his sword towards the sky and merged his Tao intent into the great Tao. A row of divine swords descended from the sky, forming a sword array, blocking in front of the army. However, this sword array was directly destroyed by Kuei Han's fist. Zhu Ying, you are no match for me. On the other side, Kuei Han roared savagely. He was like a tall madman. Every step he took caused the void to tremble. Such a martial maniac charged over without fear of death. It was a huge impact. Many of the juniors from the North Territory subconsciously retreated. Zhu Ying's Sword Emperor pointed out a finger, an extremely pure sword intent condensed. His finger was like a divine sword, erupting with surging sword radiance. After shattering Kuei Han's fist, he immediately broke away from the group, as if he wanted to lure Kuei Han away. Kuei Han's killing intent was too strong, and it was very troublesome to stay here. In order to prevent too many disciples from dying, the best way to deal with him was to lure him away from the Sunset Peak. Kuei Han naturally knew what Zhu Ying's Sword Emperor was planning, but he still chased him into the void. Immediately, the fierce sounds of the two fighting came from the horizon. Zhu Ying's Sword Emperor was quite famous in the East Continent, and he was known as the ancestor of swordsmanship. Kuei Han's killing of Zhu Ying would add to Wu Kuang's battle record. This came from his confidence in his strength. Wuck raised his eyes and stared at the void in the distance. He knew that fighting with Kuei Han was extremely risky, so Zhu Ying's Sword Emperor took the initiative to bear the risk. This was because he was afraid that Wuck would encounter an accident. But who could be safe after today's battle? Wuck took a step forward. A layer of golden sword shadows lingered around his body as he directly appeared in the middle of the army of war god guards. When the sword intent swept out, the bodies of countless war god guards exploded one after another. Even if they were ordinary Yuanfu emperors, they wouldn't be able to withstand the Tao intent of Wuk. At this moment, a ray of light suddenly slashed down. It was boundless and extremely domineering. Wuk felt a threat descending. He focused his finger and pointed upwards. 1,000-elephant divine sword broke through the sky. Clang! Flames raged in the sky. Wuk's body was shaken and sank a long distance. Divine Martial Hall, bladeless. A divine general in divine armor appeared above Swordmaster Jinji's head. Then he slashed out with his empty palm again. The void was split into two, and an unparalleled Tao intent descended in front of Swordmaster Jinji. Wind, bladeless, Kong Xiangyu, divine Martial Hall for unblemished. At this moment, not only did Wind and Bladeless attack, but Kong Xiang and Yu also joined the battle. Feng Lan held the dream branch in her hand. Waves of spiritual qi of heaven and earth continuously surged from the north. This force filled the gap in her Tao intent, allowing the pseudo-unblemished Phoenix Flower Prime to have the strength of a true unblemished cultivator. Feng Lan's opponent was Yu, fighting an old man who's about to die. Even if I win, it's quite boring. In front of the Tao ancestor, a skinny divine general spoke in a mischievous tone. It was as if he wasn't in the middle of a battle. Then you have to be careful. If an old man who's about to die is unhappy, he might drag an unlucky guy down with him, Bo Changji said. Is that so? Kongqing's tone suddenly became sharp. Light flashed in his eyes. His Tao intent transformed into domain power and whistled out. Suddenly, rows of magnificent palaces appeared around the Tao ancestor like illusions. These luxurious palaces surrounded Bo Changji in the center. The will of the emperor rumbled unceasingly, causing a resonance. In an instant, a great force descended. Countless illusory palaces closed in at the center. Each of the palaces contained astonishing power of rules. Tao formation. Bo Changji was surprised. There was actually an unblemished formation emperor among the war god guards who was skilled in formations. Before coming, he talked with Qin Hao. Zhan Wu probably didn't have any cultivators who were skilled in formations. Otherwise, the North Army wouldn't have approached Sunset Peak so rashly. If Sunset Peak had set up a powerful formation and activated a formation to attack, the various forces would have suffered heavy casualties. But the Tao ancestor had miscalculated. Bo Changji smiled faintly. He flicked the dust of Taoist in his hand. Rays of Emperor's light flew out and poured into the magnificent palaces. Suddenly, the speed at which these palaces were condensing began to slow down. The light they emitted also changed. It was as if another will was forcing them to change the direction of their attack. Creation of yin and yang, reversing the universe. The Tao ancestor had once swept through the south for an era. It wasn't an undeserved reputation. Roars of battle filled this part of the world. The unblemished cultivators of the North Territory fought with cultivators of the same level as those of Sunset Peak. The cultivators of the first realm of True Self and the first realm of Proving Way also broke out in a fierce battle. The great elder of the sea, Stomper, released his will. Countless reefs appeared in the void. The reefs were incomparably huge and turned into mountains to suppress the world. They pressed down on a certain divine general of Sunset Peak until he couldn't move. This divine general was Gu Che, whom Qin Hao had met in the Valley of the Burial God. Back then, Zhu Mian of Daqin had lost an arm to Qin Hao. Gu Che served the Sunset Battle God, so he didn't dare to act rashly. At that time, because he had received the inheritance of a divine palace guard statue, Gu Che's cultivation had advanced rapidly in recent years. He followed closely behind Meng Xiang and broke through the first realm of Proving Way to become the first emperor of True Self. Unfortunately, today he was facing an experienced first realm of True Self patriarch. The three immortals of the East Sea Artifact Immortal Mu Xinjiao, Great Elder Han Tian, and the Great Elder of the Sea Stomper. These three giants lived up to their names. The Great Elder of the Sea Stomper had completed the first realm of True Self and was very close to the Unblemished realm. Whether in terms of foundation or strength of will, he was above Guche. Even though Guche had an extraordinary divine power, he was now being beaten by the Great Elder of the Sea Stomper. Emperor Bai and the second Lord of Phoenix Flower Island, the Azure Emperor, went to the Great Elder of the Divine Swordwind people. The Great Elder of the Wind wasn't weak, but compared to Emperor Bai, he was already weaker. Now, with the Lord of Azure Island, the battle was dangerous. He kept calling for help from the other divine generals of the Sunset Peak. Unfortunately, at this time, no one cared about the divine Swordwind people. The divine generals of the Sunset Peak couldn't even take care of themselves. Yinro was facing Mengxiang. After dozens of years, Mengxiang's Emperor Dao cultivation had become even more shocking. His divine elephant power crushed the void and turned into a vast herd of elephants. Yinro's chi and blood were in turmoil. Back then, Yinro's realm was inferior to Mengxiang's. Even though they were at the same level now, the difference in will couldn't be made up. Dai, the Great Elder of the Celestial Cliffs, who had joined the Sunset Battle God, was called Great Elder Weya. He threw out a seal of mountains and seas, which made many emperors of the north spit out blood. Coincidentally, the seal pressed directly into the square where the celestial sects were gathered. In an instant, the pressure on sect leader Hu, sect leader Su, and sect leader Quan increased greatly. The three emperors of True Self had a hard time resisting the seal suppression. The seal of mountains and seas wasn't an ordinary magic treasure. Like the Dream Branch, it was passed down from generation to generation in the Celestial Cliffs. Even though it wasn't as strong as the Divine Soldier of the Phoenix Flower first-generation ancestor, it wasn't something that ordinary people could resist. With the seal of mountains and seas in his hand, Great Elder Wuya's Emperor Will of True Self was greatly strengthened. Hu Qianxiu and Su Chang saw the formation light that the three elders of the celestial sects painstakingly supported gradually crack. It was showing signs of being crushed. They couldn't help but turn pale and tremble. If this was suppressed, except for the three sect leaders, the rest of the celestial sects would be wiped out. You ignorant Wuya, how dare you hurt my descendant? I'll take your life. At this moment, a hoarse and angry roar came from the sky. Then, a formation flag flew over and hung in the air above the celestial sect's square formation. Boom! The array flag blossomed with surging Tao light and directly sent the seal of mountains and seas flying. Many people turned their heads to look and saw a strange old man whose face was flushed red, as if his wife had been stolen in the middle of the night. He held a walking stick in his hand and smashed it towards Patriarch Wuya's face. That kind of crazy and fierce attack blasted Patriarch Wuya back repeatedly. If it were not for the strange old man's legs not being very nimble, perhaps Patriarch Wuya would have already been injured by his crazy walking stick. Great Elder, sect leader who was pleasantly surprised. The Tao will of the magic treasure suppressing the sky disappeared, and he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Cripple Hu of the celestial sects finally came. Reading House. Chapter 1917. Even within the same realm, there were differences in strength. Even though the three sect masters of the celestial sect were at the same level as Patriarch Wuya, there was still a gap in their combat strength. They were worried about the safety of their juniors, so they were forced to defend. Naturally, they were not as relaxed as Patriarch Wuya, who was attacking without restraint. Moreover, Patriarch Wuya was activating the seal of mountains and seas to release its power. However, as Cripple Hu rushed into the formation, the celestial sect's disadvantage immediately turned into an advantage. Cripple Hu and Patriarch Wuya were experts of the same generation, but because one of his legs was crippled by Qin Hao, he could not cultivate many emperor techniques. However, According to his family's cultivation method and his own situation, he created a crazy walking stick technique, which was extremely powerful when used. At this moment, Patriarch Wea was restrained by Cripple Hu. Sect Master Hu, Sect Master Su, and Sect Master Quan immediately freed themselves and joined the battle. Sect Master Hu and Sect Master Su joined forces with Sect Master Hu to kill Patriarch Wea, while Sect Master Quan looked after the Celestial Sect formation. Patriarch Wea was attacked by 3 Emperor Lords of the same realm, and the situation took a turn for the worse. If not for the seal of mountains and seas, he would have died under the power of the 3 true Self-Tao Masters. As far as the eye could see, chaotic battles between Monarch realm experts were taking place everywhere in the vast void. Once someone attacked from the War Immortal Guard army, the North Territory would send experts of the same level to intercept them. At that moment, Xianyuan Wuqian and Crown Prince Ning Wu of the southern region were among the many cultivators who were charging towards the north region. The protective emperor's light that they emitted was the most eye-catching. Even in the midst of countless emperor realm cultivators, their emperor's light stood out. Go back. Saint Emperor Jiang saw this and sent a palm print containing the poison Tao precepts toward Xianyuan Wuqian. Xianyuan Wuqian's messy hair was tangled with a long beard on his face. His eyes were red, and he roared like a sick madman. Waves of Emperor's light of gravity rose around him. Countless layers of Emperor's light overlapped and turned into an extremely powerful defensive power. Saint Emperor Zhang's palm print directly shattered on it, but it did not stop him. Roar! At this moment, an extremely large lava giant stepped out from the North Territory's army and rushed towards the Xianyuan imperial family's ancestor. It raised its mountain-sized fist and directly punched out, throwing out a wave of scorching lava. Boom! Countless flaming stars danced along with the light of the fist. This punch firmly blocked Xianyuan Wuqian's steps and even forced him to take a few steps back. Brat from the blazing Sun Temple, Xianyuan Wuqian stared crazily at the lava giant that was blocking his way. He could vaguely see a figure standing inside the huge flaming body. As a southern region cultivator, he naturally recognized the other party's emperor technique and aura. He was none other than the head of the southern region's holy temple, Sun God. However, Sun Spirit, who had been a little brat in front of great ancestor Xianyuan back then, had now grown into an existence that could contend with him. Indeed, the younger generation would surpass the older. There was no need for more words. Xianyuan Wuqian immediately engaged in a fierce battle with the lava fire spirit controlled by the sun god. Waves of ferocious emperor will bombarded the area where the two of them were. It was as if the end of the world had come. The battle was extremely intense. Other than Holy Emperor Jiang, no one dared to approach this area. At this moment, Crown Prince Ning Tianxing glanced over. At first, the Sunset Battle God said that he and Xianyuan Wuqian would hand him and Xianyuan Wuqian over to Qin how to calm Denda's anger. At that time, he and Xianyuan Wuqian were extremely nervous. But now, the relationship between Qin Hao and the Sunset Battle God had completely broken down, and there was no possibility of peace talks. Then it was time to go all out. Ning Tianxing did not pay attention to great ancestor Xianyuan. Even if he saw Saint Emperor Jiang glaring at him from the side, and who knew when he would make a move, he had no intention of stepping forward to help. There was no relationship between him and Xianyuan Wuqian. What did Xianyuan Wuqian's life have to do with him? Ning Tianxing's Guqin's spirit bloomed, and black and white chess pieces emerged, turning into a halo of light that surrounded his body. His will of the way radiated, spreading toward the army of the northern land. His body gradually exuded a mysterious and strange power. It was hard to say how powerful this power was, but it gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. Others are fighting with their lives here. Don't ruin things and play your Guqin. Just as Ning Tianxing was about to urge the laws of heaven and earth to play the demonic chaotic divine melody to interfere with the battlefield, a tall figure suddenly appeared in front of him. This figure was shrouded in demonic qi, like a thick cloud of black smoke. There was a pair of small horns on its forehead, and it was looking down at him with a pair of cold eyes. It gave people the feeling that this person was looking at an ant. He regarded Crown Prince Ning Tianxing, who had the power of the divine path, as an ant from the lower worlds. Zhou Wudao. Ning Tianxing saw the other person's facial features clearly and was very surprised. Under the thick demonic qi, Zhou Wudao's temperament changed greatly. His figure was also taller and more imposing than before, and even his appearance changed slightly. However, this outline could still be recognized. It was Zhou Wudao, the prince of the great Zhou Empire who was slaughtered by the Xiang. Zhou Wudao, did he not die? Moreover, the aura on his body was the power of the divine path. No, it was not the divine path, but the pressure was not inferior to the laws. This was the demonic way. Haha, back then, you were known as the second most talented person in the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, second only to Qin Hao. Even Shouwuk was not in your eyes. I have always wanted to experience it, and today, I have such a rare opportunity. Come on, Ning Tianxing, let me see what you are capable of. Although you have always been second, before I beat Qin Hao, I am still quite interested in getting rid of you first. After Zhou Wudao finished speaking, he turned into a gust of demonic qi and fled into the void. His soul had fused with the will of the 10 underworld's demon king. He was Zhou Wudao, and also the reincarnation of the 10 underworld's great demon. If the power of the demonic god exploded here, except for the unblemished cultivators of both sides, no one could survive. Ning Tianxing looked up at the departing demonic qi and found it difficult to calm down. He hesitated for a moment, then decisively put away the Guqin spirit and turned into a ray of brilliant divine light. Surrounded by the black and white chess pieces, he chased after Zhou Wudao. The Sunset Battle God was a legendary person. No, it should be said that he was a god, a true god. Having personally experienced Zhang Wu's ability, Ning Tianxing knew very well that in front of the Sunset Battle God, even if he could one day completely control the heaven and earth chess and be able to lead the weapon spirit, he would still be nothing more than a divine servant. This was like the difference between an emperor and an emperor. The difference between the two was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. He had no chance of becoming a god that dominated this world, because this divine wilderness continent already had a god, a divine king of war who had lived for countless years. Ning Tianxing chased after Zhou Wudao. Both of them had the power of laws that could destroy heaven and earth. Even if they hadn't fully mastered it, they were still the absolute destroyers under the heavenly Dao on the battlefield of Sunset Peak. Whether it was Qin Hao or Zhang Wu, they definitely wouldn't allow them to release their divine Dao laws unscrupulously. Boom, boom, boom. Countless emperor lights intertwined and shuttled back and forth. In the battlefield of the void of Sunset Peak, figures would often be hit by the emperor lights, causing their bodies to explode and their divine souls to disappear. Whether it was the battle god guards or the orthodoxies of the North Territory, even Emperor Yuan's chances of survival were very slim. Once they were hit by any of the laws, unless their cultivation was high enough and they could forcefully suppress it, they would immediately bleed on the spot. In a chaotic battle, who would have the chance to suppress their injuries? The divine martial hall's 4 unparalleled deities, Kuei Han, the sacred sword Wind People's Patriarch, Patriarch Wuya, and dozens of Sunset Peak's true self divine generals, including Meng Xiang, were all restrained by the orthodoxies of the North Territory. On the contrary, no one dared to disturb Qin Hao and the Sunset Battle God, who were in the core area of the battlefield. Qin Hao and Zhang Wu looked at each other across space. Within 1,000 meters of the two of them, an absolute domain was formed, and no attacks came. At this time, Qin Hao's emperor intent radiated out, enveloping the vast void. Almost every situation of the powerhouses fighting could be clearly imprinted in his divine consciousness. The 4 people of the divine martial hall were indeed powerful. Wuk, Dao Zhu, Feng Lan, and Wei Wei didn't have the slightest advantage. Among them, Feng Lan and Wei Wei were even at a disadvantage. Moreover, The emperor techniques used by the four of them vaguely gave Qin Hao a sense of familiarity. Battle techniques, emperor techniques, and array Dao. It seemed that their areas of expertise had a hint of Dinda back then. However, Qin Hao didn't have the time to pay attention to the four people of the divine martial hall. The pressure he faced was heavier than Wuck and the others. It could be said that in this battle, there was no clear winner between him and Zhan Wu. Neither side could be considered the final victor. Makamanji, Yinro Bao Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and Chun Wanqin. There were also Shi Dong, Lian Han, Xikong Shu, and Zhong Liqing. There were also Shua Xiao, Su Jin, and the others who were fighting. Many of them ran into divine generals of the Sunset Peak who had proven their Dao. "It's time," Qin Hao said quietly, looking at Zhan Wu. With every moment that passed, many people from both sides would die. Even if they weren't his people, the people of the White Lunar Pavilion, Thunderpool Hall, 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower Sect, Shua clan of the East Sea, Dao Sect, and Immortal Sect were also fated. They chose to trust Dendi, hoping to survive in the chaos of the divine wilderness. Qin Hao couldn't let down everyone's trust. "Between you and me, do we really have to go to this step?" Zhan Wu's immense emperor will pervaded the air. His body flickered with the dazzling light of battle particles. Like Qin Hao, he was also observing the battlefield. He wasn't worried about the four people of the divine martial hall. He didn't care whether the sacred sword wind people and celestial cliffs were dead or alive. Other than suppressing the two unstable factors, Ning Tianxing and Kuei Han, his emperor was more focused on Bao and Xiaogua's group. Those people were considered the weaker ones in the Imperial Lord battle. It was easy for accidents to happen. He wouldn't be able to explain to anyone who died. This was a real battle. In his plan, other than Xiao Lu, Zhuge Xiu, and the four people of the divine martial hall, no one else knew his intentions. Mu Xinjiao had already paid the price with his life in order to ignite the flames of war and force the army of the North Territory to act. As for the rest of the War God Guards, they had also won for the War God with their faith. They were absolutely merciless. "Big brother, this is the last time I'm calling you. You and I both know that I'm not fighting this battle for myself. Every second that passes will cost the lives of both your divine guards and mine." Qin Hao said, "Do you have to get to the bottom of this? Do you have to chase me to the end?" Zhan Wu said, "Perhaps Dinda would be sadder if he knew the truth." "Let's do it." Qin Hao stretched out his hand. The red lotus Dao flame rose in his palm. He sighed. "I don't know where you've arranged Xiao Lu and Zhuge Xiu. There's no aura of them here. But I can tell you that in this battle, other than a few servants, none of the orthodoxies will spare anyone. If you want to sneak in and cut off my path of retreat, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Zhan Wu was stunned. Was he really so unbearable in Qin Hao's eyes? Cut off his path of retreat. Yes, Zhan Wu had indeed cut off a path of retreat. It was his own path, the path of the 30,000 divine guards. He was willing to use the path of the war god in exchange for Dinda's return to the primeval realm. He was willing to use his life to pave the way to the untainted land, so that Qin Hao would not be trapped in this small world forever. "Regardless of life or death, victory or defeat, you're still my brother." Zhan Wu smiled. Under the operation of the art of honest combat, his body emitted extremely strong battle intent particles. He slowly clenched his fists that were wearing boxing gloves. At this moment, his temperament became incomparably cold, as if he had transformed into a real war god of the ninth heaven. Chapter 1918. Zhan Wu's body was filled with the light of fighting spirit particles. His aura began to rise as he used his cultivation technique. The sunset battle god, who was already shining brightly, now burst with the light of fighting spirit. No one below the unblemished Tharch realm could see through that layer of light and see the true appearance of the battle god. That light contained a very mysterious power of the Great Path. Even her 10,000 spirit fire eyes couldn't see through it. The two lords of the East Continent are finally going to fight. From afar, many East Continent grand cultivators who were carefully avoiding the battlefield saw the sunset battle gods aura become stronger and stronger. The pressure was so strong that it almost suffocated them. Not only the Luri battle god, but the Alchemy Emperor's aura was also growing stronger. Qin Hao's great Tao flames were like a layer of blood-red flames that burned the heavens. Everyone only had to feel the fire for a moment to feel the danger of being burned to death. The 3 deans of the 7-star pharmacy, the 4 palace lords of Jixia Academy, and many Buddhist monks of the Vajra Institute all stared at the 2 powerful cultivators. In this battle, who would become the true master of the divine wilderness? These 2 good brothers of the past would become the true master. Dean Feng, Tai, Shirtian Buddha Emperor, I advise all of you to behave yourselves in the contest between me and the Pill Emperor. Otherwise, I guarantee that all of you will die before me before I run out of strength. Zhan Wu stepped in the air and gradually approached Qin Hao. His godlike eyes stared in their direction. That gaze seemed to directly pierce through the divine souls and imperial bodies of the grand cultivators. Old Man Tai, the dean of the 7-star pharmacy, and Shirtian Buddha of the Vajra Institute all trembled at the same time. They were intimidated by the sunset battle god, and their bodies didn't seem to listen to them. Then, they led their masters and distanced themselves from the battlefield again. Of course, they didn't doubt the sunset battle god's warning. Even if they were still alive, Zhan Wu only needed to move a finger to kill them. At the end of the Emperor's path, who would be the peak? Under the sunset arrow, no emperor would exist. Boom! In order to intimidate the mighty figures who were watching the battle, Zhan Wu stomped his foot and dashed forward. His palm glowed with dazzling particles of fighting while as he slapped toward Qin Hao. The great path did not have any trace of the Emperor's light when he struck out his palm. However, everything seemed to be crushed and exploded under his palm, swallowed and dissolved by the light of the particles. Qin Hao unleashed the art of the indestructible samsara from within his body. The power of tyrannical fire wrapped around his body, rolling and roaring in his palm. Will of the great path filled the space, dominating the great path of this area. He also struck out with his palm. His palm collided with Zhan Wu's. Boom! The blood-colored waves of fire rolled and spread, sweeping wildly in all directions, mixed with terrifying particles of fighting will. With the 2 of them as the center, it swallowed up a radius of thousands of miles, shielding everyone outside and forming an absolute realm of the way. The fluctuation of this layer of Tao insight barrier was extremely strong, and it swallowed Dindi and the sunset war god within it and sealed them within. Everyone outside the barrier was unable to know the situation of the battle within. Their will of the way is too strong, and they are deliberately avoiding hurting their own people. In the army of the North Territory, Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and Chen Wanqin, with Bao as the center, protected her in the crowd. They all looked at the light of the realm of the way that had suddenly appeared. They didn't know how strong Qin Hao was at the moment, but they assumed that he had returned to the peak state of his previous life, or even surpassed it. After all, in these years of seclusion, Qin Hao had integrated the imperial techniques of his previous life and the unique techniques of the divine palace that he had cultivated after his rebirth. He couldn't be measured by the strength of an ordinary, unblemished great emperor. Moreover, Xiaogua and the others also knew that Qin Hao still had an ancient divine cauldron in his hands. If there were no divine-level experts, Dindu was basically invincible in the world. There was basically no suspense. Unfortunately, the Sunset War God was a god in the eyes of the people. As for how powerful Zhan Wu was, one would know by looking at the reverence that the supreme imperial lords of the 5 realms had for him. Therefore, in this battle, Qin Hao was still taking a huge risk. Zhan Wu had a divine bow in his hands, and it was said that its power was even more terrifying than Meng Ji's. Don't worry, if he dares to fight this battle, it means that he is confident of winning. Xiaohan saw that Bao was staring at the realm of the way with a serious expression. She must be worried about Qin Hao. I'm not worried about him. It's just that it feels so strange. Bao Er's beautiful eyes flickered with a faint fire. Ever since she had arrived at Sunset Peak, She had been unable to see through the sunset war god's protective imperial light. She was naturally curious about what this expert, who was known as the top martial artist in the divine wilderness, looked like. But even after opening the fire spirit eye, she still couldn't see through it. She could only vaguely feel that the sunset war god was a little familiar. It was very strange. Swoosh! A beam of dazzling blade light slashed through the void. The terrifying blade light streaked across, and the robe of the white Yuetian pavilion master was instantly torn to shreds. His body spun rapidly under the blade light, and a piece of flesh was almost cut off. However, the two white Yuetian pavilion imperial elders who were fighting nearby were not so lucky. Caught off guard, they were cut by the blade light. Their imperial bodies were split into two on the spot, and their spiritual souls were severed. A look of horror flashed across the white Yuetian pavilion master's eyes. He felt a pressure from his opponent and knew that if they continued to fight, they would most likely be defeated. Wan Qin, you stay here. Little Gua, go and help. Yi Shuihan saw the tragic state of the white Yuetian pavilion master's emperor, Dao, cultivators, and realized that the divine general of Sunset Peak, who was fighting white Yuetian pavilion master, was very strong. This was the natural intuition of a disciple of the divine palace. The strength of a person's emperor, Dao, could be easily determined from the depth of the will released. White Yuetian pavilion master was obviously a little weaker than the divine general. Even though they were both emperors who had proven their Dao, they still couldn't defeat the other party. If they continued to fight, white Yuetian pavilion master would be in danger. Buzz! Sayogwa and Yi Shuin's bodies separated from the North Territory Army and joined the battle at the front. They had been painstakingly trained in the 100 Spirits formation realm and had also advanced from proving their Dao to becoming emperors. They were just at the same level as the divine general. Little Gua, Shuihan, be careful. That person is not easy to deal with. Xiaohan hurriedly reminded them. Her cultivation level was one level higher, and she had stepped into the true self Emperor Dao. She could feel that the divine general who had defeated white Yuetian pavilion masters was extraordinary. It seemed that he had gone through extremely hard training. Senior White, go support the others. Leave this to us. Yi Shuihan shouted loudly. As he spoke, a water spear condensed and flew through the air toward the divine general of Sunset Peak. Be careful. This person's will is extremely strong. White Yuetian pavilion master subconsciously looked below his ribs. His expression was very ugly. Half of his sleeve had been torn, and the sword had even cut open his robe, leaving a shallow mark on his body. Fortunately, he had dodged quickly. Although his self-esteem had been hurt, white Yuetian pavilion master still chose to avoid the divine general after he finished speaking. He left him to Yi Shuihan and Sayogwa, and turned into a beam of emperor light to kill the other war god guards. Bang! At this moment, Yi Shuihan's water spear had just landed in front of the invincible blade. The invincible blade raised his eyes to take a look, and a smile appeared under his helmet. He swung the huge heavy blade in his hand and swept it up. With a buzzing sound, a heavy roar was heard in the void, and the water spear was shaken into water foam that filled the sky with ease. Weak and powerless, the invincible blade sneered with a mocking tone. Go! A hint of anger appeared on Yi Shuihan's face. He raised his palms high above his head, and a sacred blue light sprinkled down. His body was incomparably sacred in the light, like a heavenly water god who ruled the rivers. Behind him, the momentum of a vast ocean appeared. Under the drive of Dao will, an endless stream of water rolled out. The huge waves rolled and roared, wanting to annihilate the opponent in the torrent. Roar! At the same time, Sayogwa released his Emperor's spirit. A huge phantom of a green ox appeared behind him. The battle Emperor art of Mizar peak in his body was activated. His fists were pierced by the glaring golden light. They smashed into the sky, and two whitish gold fist forces shuttled through Yi Shuihan's huge waves. In front of me, even waves can be split open. The invincible blade smile was even wider. When he spoke, the sarcasm in his voice was even stronger. He swung his huge heavy blade and slashed down with both hands. A beam of terrifying blade radiance slashed forward like a huge fin that split the river. With a boom, it collided with Sayogwa's fist radiance. Boom! A deafening roar broke out between heaven and earth. The fist radiance was destroyed by the blade radiance. The endless torrent that came crashing down burst along with it. Its momentum was not enough, and it even swept out in the opposite direction. It spread through the bodies of Yishue Han and Sayogwa, forcing the two of them to retreat in embarrassment. I'll let you see what power is. The invincible blade spat out a domineering voice. His burly body, wearing heavy armor, jumped up. The giant blade in his hand quickly waved twice, sweeping out two sharp rays of light. Chi! The rays of light cut through the space and intertwined into a cross-shaped slash. It carried a fierce blade will. It was as if countless blades were born in the void. They flew together with the cross-shaped slash and enveloped Yishue Han and Sayogwa at the same time. So strong, Yishue Han stabilized his body, and a look of shock appeared in his eyes. Other than the disciples of the Divine Palace, he had never seen anyone with such a strong will of the way, not to mention the outside world. Even among the disciples of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, there were not many masters who could achieve such destructive power. In Yi Shuhin's impression, only the personal disciples of the 7 peak masters had such a strong will of the way. Among these people, there were even fewer people who could defeat him and Sayogwa. Only Lei Jiao, Zhou Wudao, and Shou could. Of course, if Zhang Yi was alive and stepped into the Imperial Lord realm, he should also have such strength. It seemed that there were still some top geniuses on Sunset Peak who were not inferior to the disciples of the Divine Palace. Brother Han, this guy's sword will is a bit too strong. He's using his unique skill. Sayogwa gritted his teeth and said. At this time, he did not dare to underestimate his opponent in the slightest. No Wonder Master by Xian could not resist. With such strength, he and Yishue Han also felt the pressure. If they did not use their unique skills, the two of them might die in the hands of their opponent. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Golden light constantly erupted from Sayogwa's back, waist, elbows, and knees. The 9 palaces of the War Emperor art were all opened, and he decisively cast the fighting battle law body. In an instant, a huge and majestic phantom of the war god descended from the sky above him. Its power suppressed the world and enveloped Sayogwa. As the barbaric roar of the ox spread out, Sayogwa's sovereign spirit and emperor will merged, and his entire body turned into a human-shaped ox. His eyes were red, and his body stood upright. His body was covered in ferocious iron armor, transformed from the ox demon will. In his hand was a huge, pitch-black ancient stone as big as a mountain. The stone was permeating an extremely powerful emperor weapon. Chapter 1919. Opening the 9 palaces, casting the fighting battle body, and releasing the demonic bull transformation Dao will to the extreme, Sayogwa held the emperor artifact ancient stone in his hand. Layers of black light waves swept from his position as he displayed his peak martial strength. Yishue Han slowly closed her eyes. As her long hair fluttered in the wind, her body flashed with the radiance of an emperor's weapon. An azure armor covered her water god body. The will of the way in her blood rumbled. She was also using the supreme technique of Daozong Peak, the Empress Wa Holy Spirit mantra. At this moment, Sayogwa and Yishuhin's aura reached the peak of their lives. They emitted a sense of oppression that forced the people nearby to retreat. Go! Yishue Han suddenly opened his eyes. His hand seals changed, and endless water vapor filled the space. Under the influence of his Dao will, the space seemed to be still. The battlefield seemed to have sunk to the bottom of the sea. Under the cover of his Dao will, everyone's movements and attacks became slow. The cross-slash that was coming from the front seemed to have been blocked by a deep-sea vortex. It suddenly stopped, and the sharp light dimmed a little. The The countless blades that were shuttling along with it were also trapped in space, unable to leap forward. Roar! Sayogwa moved. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he hugged the huge ancient stone and rolled forward. Along the way, he crushed the void. The Emperor Will and the Emperor Artifact resonated. Accompanied by a violent shock wave, he crashed directly in front of the Invincible Blade. The Invincible Blade let out a low roar as he stared straight ahead. As the direct disciple of Mizar War Sovereign, he understood the power of the Battle Emperor art better than Sayogwa. Normal attacks could not break through the defense of the fighting battle body. Not only was his defense shocking, but his destructive power was even more shocking. A simple punch could injure an emperor. Moreover, Sayogwa had absorbed his soul into his body and was driving an ancient stone to crash toward him. Buzz! Beams of golden light constantly bloomed from all parts of the Invincible Blade's body. His 9 palaces acupoints opened at the same time. Dilly surged in his meridians and gathered, flowing toward the domineering blade in his hand. His blade exploded with a blade radiance that was thousands of feet long. It slashed forward and hit the rolling ancient stone. Boom! Gushur was being held by Qi Xiaohua. His angle was very precise, and he had calculated everything while rolling. When the attack came, the blade just happened to be under the protection of Gushur, and it did not hurt Qi Xiaohua. However, the blade will of this strike was so strong that it managed to separate Qi Xiaohua from the ancient rock. A pale white mark appeared on the ancient rock, and the impact caused it to deviate from its original trajectory. It flew to the side, and as it rolled, a large number of Runhuang level divine war guards were killed. It also crushed several people from the orthodoxies of the North Territory. God Fist. Gushur was sent flying, but Qi Xiaohua rushed to the front of the Invincible Blade. Her huge fist exploded with a dazzling golden Emperor's ray, and she landed a heavy blow on the Invincible Blade's chest. Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard. The Invincible Blade had just cut off the ancient stone, but it also suffered from the Emperor's weapon's will of Wei. His hands were numb, and before he could defend himself, he was hit by Qi Xiaohua's punch. Blood flowed out from under Zhang Ye's helmet. The power of the 9 palaces was terrifying. He felt as if his chest was penetrated by Sayogwa's fist will. He was severely injured. However, his mind was extremely clear. He knew what his mission was. At this moment, Zhang Yi endured the injury to his emperor body and punched Qi Xiaohua in the face. The latter's mouth was crooked, and he was sent flying like a cannonball. His cheeks were caved in from the impact. How is this possible? Yi Shuihan watched the battle with a shocked expression on his face. Battle Emperor Art. The divine general under the command of the Sunset War God was able to use the supreme imperial method of the Mizar Peak of the Divine Palace. It was impossible to describe Yi Shuihan's feelings at the moment. His mind was blank as he stared at Zhang Yi, who was also flying backward. He didn't need to think to know that this person was from the Divine Palace. Die! After Zhang Yi put some distance between them, he immediately found the space to use his blade technique. The Clan Slayer blade technique flew. Fierce rays of blade Qi once again blasted toward Sayogwa and Yi Shuihan. The rays of light crisscrossed, carrying an unstoppable momentum. It was as if the heavens were about to collapse. Danger! Xiaohan's heart was beating fast. She did not expect that Sayogwa and Yi Shuihan would be suppressed in such a short exchange. She also did not expect this person to use the ultimate technique of the Divine Palace. There was no time to think. If this crisscrossing wave of power struck Sayogwa and the dazed Yi Shuihan, even if they did not die, they would be severely injured. Buzz! Buzz! In the void, figures moved one after another. The chief disciples of the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect, Sikong Shu, Lian Han, and Zhong Liqing, all left the formation of the North Territory and rushed forward. Almost as soon as Xiao Han pulled Sayogwa out of the jaws of death, the 3 Imperial Lords released their Dao power at the same time. Waves of Dilly converged and formed a huge barrier to block the wave of blade light that cut through the void. Boom! The crisscrossing rays of light were like a net that shattered the barrier of Sikong Shu and the others. However, the ferocious momentum still caused the three of them to retreat 3 steps at the same time. Their faces were filled with shock. They were all Imperial Lords, but the Divine General of the Sunset Peak was definitely stronger than them. "What are you doing?" Xiao Han dragged the confused Xiaohua and shouted at Yishui Han. "No, it can't be him. Yes, it can't be. Why is it like this?" Tears flowed out of Yishuihan's eyes as his expression became more and more painful. Seeing the other party use the Battle Emperor art and combining it with the domineering blade intent, he vaguely thought of a person, Zhang Yi. However, the Sunset Battle God had clearly said that Zhang Yi was already dead. At this moment, Yi Shuihan's mind was greatly affected and his thoughts were in chaos. If Zhang Yi wasn't dead, why did he join the Battle God Guards and become a divine general and become their enemy? What happened in between? Kill him. Sikong Shu's eyes were sharp. She didn't have the same feelings as Yishui Han. This divine general was the strongest of all the Imperial Lords in the Battle God Guards. He was even stronger than many Imperial Lords in the North Territory. He was a huge threat and had to be eliminated immediately. Screech. A huge phantom of a divine phoenix appeared and enveloped Sikong Shu's body. The first peak's ultimate technique, the Heavenly Phoenix Sword, was used. The power of Tao intent triggered a natural phenomenon. The 9 Heavens Divine Phoenix flew around Sikong Shu. She held the first peak's supreme imperial sword in her hand, and the sword intent she emitted grew stronger and stronger. Wong. At the same time, Zhong Liqing released his imperial spirit. A primordial gourd appeared on his shoulder. Through it, one could faintly see a layer of shocking primordial light flowing inside. Suppress. Lian Han was the fastest to act. Her slender fingers pointed forward as Emperor Intent snaked forward. In the void, a hexagonal ice tower with intense black light fell down and pressed down on Zhang Ye's head. Ice tower. Oh no! Zhang Ye had just repelled Qi Xiaohua, and the injury from the other's punch of the rules had entered his body. Before he could completely suppress it, a terrifying ice prison fell down in an instant. The will of the great path mixed with the aura of death spread out. The blood in Zhang Ye's body seemed to be frozen by this will. He knew very well that if he was trapped, the consequences would be unimaginable. There was no other way. He could only endure. Clenching his teeth, Zhang Yi raised his head and roared. The 9 acupoints on his body exploded with even more radiance. With a buzzing sound, a group of mighty battle phantoms expanded, casting a battle phantoms to resist the tower. "Do it," Lian Han said. Her Emperor intent controlled the ice tower to suppress the battle god phantom. Next, she would let Sikong Shu and Zhong Liqing attack. She wanted to see how this divine general could endure. True Phoenix Heaven / The giant phoenix in the void turned into a ray of sword light and entered Sikong Shu's body. The supreme Emperor sword in her hand exploded with unparalleled great path light. She was like a sword, moving with the sword. She turned into a ray of light and pierced forward. Open. The grand mist gourd on Zhong Liqing's shoulder spewed out a tidal wave of water that suddenly appeared beneath Zhang Ye's feet. At the same time, a beam of grand mist light shot forward together with Sikong Shu's sword light. The 3 monstrous geniuses of the Phoenix Flower Sect were bound to succeed in one strike and kill this Sunset Peak's divine general. Boom! The terrifying wave gushed up, and the Tao power blasted on his body. Zhang Yi felt like he was trapped in a majestic flood. In an instant, he felt a fatal sense of suffocation. His consciousness began to blur. At this time, an ice tower was pressing down on him. The Death Tao power seemed to corrode his soul and wanted to freeze his consciousness. In front of him, there were 2 rays of light piercing toward him. "Break for me!" Zhang Yi roared crazily. Relying on his strong and stubborn will, he forcefully stabilized his consciousness. His 9 palaces battle power was pushed to the limit. His Battle Tao body exploded with unparalleled radiance and actually broke through Lian Han's ice tower. In the next instant, 9 rays of sword light bloomed between heaven and earth. The 9 rays merged into one and slashed forward. Chi! The terrifying ray of light pierced through everything. It was just one ray of sword light, but it felt like 9 rays of sword light were flying at the same time, cutting through everything. Everything would be shattered under this Tao power. Move! Sikong Shu shouted anxiously. She stopped midway and only had time to push Zhongli Qing, who was beside her, away. Whoosh! In the next second, the ray of light extended past her throat. An imperceptible crack appeared on the Supreme Emperor's sword in Sikong Shu's hand. Although the crack was very small, it was enough to take her life. Senior Sister Sikong. Zhongli Qing's tears flowed like a spring. She watched as a line of blood appeared on Sikong Shu's white neck. Immediately, that line of blood spurted out like a fountain. Sikong Shu's body leaned back, and the hand that was holding the Emperor's sword loosened. She died on the spot. 3 Dao proving the Archlords worked together, and one of them died. Zhang Ye's body rapidly retreated, wanting to leave this battlefield. The Sunset Peak's divine general armor on his body had cracked into a net. His organs were in pain as if they were burning. A trace of struggle and regret flashed in his eyes. But immediately, his gaze calmed down again. He was very clear that if he hadn't used his limit just now, he would have been the one to die. He still wanted to continue fighting and see what kind of miracle would happen in the end. Hence, he could only let that phoenix flower fairy down. The Sunset Battle God had said that he could give it his all in this battle and not care about any sacrifice or price. Even if he met his loved ones, he could still attack. Since the Sunset Battle God had said so, there must be some meaning behind it. Perhaps those who had sacrificed themselves might not be unable to return. Forcing out Qin Hao's power of the divine Tao and reversing the heavenly Tao's reincarnation cycle, the dead could be revived. I'm sorry. Zhang Yi used one hand to cover his chest that had been hit by Caiogua. That wild power was wreaking havoc in his body, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to suppress. He quickly retreated and urgently needed to slow down. However, at this moment, a glaring light suddenly descended from the distant battlefield, directly cutting towards Zhang Ye's path of retreat. Although he didn't have time to see who it was, at this moment, an extremely majestic military aura filled the entire space. It was as if the expert that had descended here wasn't alone, but had brought thousands of soldiers and horses behind him. Chapter 1920. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Abandoning the 6 senses and 9 senses clang. Zhang Yi turned around and slashed with his Overlord saber. It exploded with an intense Tao intent radiance. The ferocious impact reverberated back, aggravating the nomological injuries in his body. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth as he was sent flying thousands of feet away. Qin Yun. Zhang Yi looked at the figure with a solemn expression beneath his helmet. He was about the same height as Qin Hao. The Overlord halberd in his hand emitted an intense, murderous glow. It was none other than Qin Yun. I don't care who you are. Since you have been stained with the blood of Fairy Fenghua of the North, you have to pay the same price. Qin Yun's eyes flickered with intense, killing intent. He felt pain and disappointment in his heart. He looked at Zhang Yi, who was wearing the Setting Sun Peak's divine general armor, and tightened his grip on the Overlord halberd. That will depend on your ability, Zhang Yi said coldly. He slashed out with his Overlord saber, sweeping out a ferocious storm of saber chi that shot towards Qin Yun like a whirlwind. Qin Yun's eyes flickered with a sharp luster. The Overlord halberd in his hand was replaced by the resplendent Xinyuan halberd that was pure gold. Immediately, a monstrous Tharch light erupted. His 9 palaces' acupoints opened as he stabbed forward with his halberd, spewing out a blinding flood of light. In this flood of light, an iron-blooded army appeared out of thin air. War chariots rumbled as they crushed the void. Countless cavalrymen on war horses formed a battle formation and charged forward with spears in hand. At that moment, Qin Yun was like a commander standing behind an iron-blooded army. Back then, Qin Hao had given him the power of the guardian statue in front of the buried god palace, allowing him to possess the war god's laws. This Dao intent power was extremely powerful. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of war drums reverberated through the world. It came from the iron-blooded army that crushed the void. It shook Zhang Ye's soul as his blood churned. He saw the storm of saber qi sink into the Dao intent army, shattering countless war chariots. However, the might of the army was too powerful. With the support of Qin Yun's Dao, the army appeared endlessly. The Overlord Halberd. Translation. 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 As translation. 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 Zhang Yi laughed sorrowfully. Even if he wasn't injured, he might not be a match for Qin Yun when facing such a Dao inside attack. What's more, Zhang Ye's Dao intent was depleted, and there were still nomological injuries in his body. It was even more impossible for him to defeat this personal disciple of the war supremacy from the Mizar Peak. Retreat. Zhang Yi retreated rapidly towards the war Immortal Guard army without any hesitation. Zhang Yi did not wish to die under Emperor Xuanyuan's halberd. Regardless of whether it was the Dao intent or the weapon that Qin Yun wielded, they were all specially equipped by Qin Hao, allowing Qin Yun to unleash his innate talent to its limits. On the other side, in the void far away from the vast battlefield of Sunset Peak, here, two rays of light that contained supreme divine power interweaved, forming an awe-inspiring domain of the great Dao. A gigantic heaven and earth chessboard spanned across space. The crisscrossing chessboard emitted a terrifying nomological glow. Black and white chess pieces landed on the intersection points of the chessboard. With Ning Tianxing as the core, they formed the 4 divisions and 9 palaces, suppressing everything within the chessboard. Ning Tianxing sat cross-legged in the middle of the chessboard. The sound of the zither flowed beneath his palm. Musical notes danced with his 10 fingers, forming a tune of the great Dao. Countless tall demon spirits wielding black scythes were born within the chessboard, dancing to the tune. On the other side of the chessboard, the great Zhou prince, Zhou Wudao, crossed his arms and floated in the air. A pair of gigantic pitch-black demon wings gently flapped behind his back. Endless demon aura lingered around him as the power of the great Dao of fiend gods filled the space. His expression was very relaxed, as though he was not affected by the heavenly demon song at all. Seeing Ning Tianxing, who was focused on playing the zither, Zhou Wudao slowly smiled. The demon spirits within the chessboard were controlled by the tune to attack him. Every time they approached, the demon spirits wielding death scythes would transform into wisps of gentle demon aura that gathered around Zhou Wudao's body. Following this, the demon aura that emanated from him became more and more intense. This scene was very strange. It was as though the two of them were not fighting. It was more like Ning Tianxing was playing a tune for Zhou Wudao to strengthen the power of the demonic way, using the tune to nourish his will of the demon god. "Are you still not willing to give up?" Zhou Wudao asked. Before coming to Sunset Peak to fight, Qin Hao had privately told him that it was fine if Ning Tianxing did not use the heaven and earth chess. Once he used it, he would be controlled by the implement spirit and temporarily lose part of his talent. For example, his power of the Phantom Fox. The heaven and earth chess was indeed extraordinary, but all of this had to be done according to the will of the implement spirit. Ning Tianxing himself could not control the divine implement, so no matter what emperor technique he practiced, it was only a divine performance in the rules of the chessboard. Therefore, they only needed to fight to see whose rules were stronger. Zhou Wudao had inherited the power of the 10 puppet demons. Qin Hao estimated that it would not be easy for Crown Prince Wu Ning to win this battle based on the situation between him and Ning Tianxing. In fact, it was not only not easy, it was far beyond Qin Hao's expectations. Zhou Wudao was not affected by the heavenly demon song when he was immersed in the chessboard. Instead, the song that confused his mind became a tonic for him. The demonic Wei aura condensed from the Tao was constantly being absorbed by the 10-puppet demon's power of the demon god. Now you should know that this song can't affect me. The Tao of laws contained in the implement spirit can't suppress me either. You have no chance of winning in this chessboard, Zhou Wudao said lazily. There was a faint disappointment in his voice. He thought that he could have a good contest with the arrogant crown Prince Wu Ning. In the end, this was it? Not necessarily. Ning Tianxing did not stop playing. He knew very well that if he could not win by relying on the heaven and earth chess, then he was no match for Zhou Wudao without using the implement spirit's rules. Under the rules were ineffective. As long as he left the chessboard, even if he had 9 lives, he would not be able to withstand the destruction of Zhou Wudao's demon god power. Indeed, he might lose this battle again. He did not expect Zhou Wudao's demonic will to be so terrifying that it was even more difficult to deal with in Qin Hao's. However, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, Ning Tianxing would not give up. He wanted to see how long Zhou Wudao could absorb it. Both sides had not completely controlled the power of the divine path, and the Prince of the Great, Zhou, should have a limit. As a result, the battle here was exceptionally calm. Compared to the tragic battle at Sunset Peak, the two people in the chessboard, one was diligently playing the guqin, and the other was leisurely listening. Zhou Wudao was arranged by Qin how to contain Ning Tianxing. He thought that an unprecedentedly fierce battle of the divine path would break out, but it turned out that he was the most relaxed of all. Boom! In a vast and boundless world light of the great path, the red lotus flames in Qin Hao's body roared, and he collided with the sunset battle god's palm. Terrifying particles of fighting will swept up flames from their palms. Both of them stood still like pillars, and neither of them moved an inch. "You've recovered to your peak?" Zhang Wu asked, slightly surprised. The will of the emperor contained in this palm was not weaker than his. It was at the peak of unblemished perfection, and was not much different from Qin Hao's state when he broke into the valley of the burial of the gods. "Not yet," Qin Hao said. "In that peak, there is a will of the emperor from my previous life." "Your memory is not bad." Zhang Wu smiled. "Likewise. Your will of the emperor from your previous life happens to be suppressed by part of my fighting will. If you want to take it out, you have to defeat me first." Zhang Wu also did not have a complete body of the will of the Wei. That depends on how much you've mastered the sunset archery technique. Beams of golden light shot out from various parts of Qin Hao's body. Under the operation of the emperor's technique, the 9 palace acupoints spewed out extremely vigorous dilly, flowing along the meridians. In an instant, the dilly increased greatly, and the red lotus flames under his palm exploded, sending Zhang Wu flying. "I will definitely not disappoint you." Zhang Wu's body slid back for some distance, and he quickly steadied himself. His fists flashed with dense particles of fighting will. He roared and blasted a blazing fist of fighting will forward. Qin Hao did not need to be restrained. He stepped forward, and scales grew out, covering his fists and cheeks. With every step he took, his body grew taller and stronger. Then he raised his hand and grabbed forward. There was a deafening explosion, and the dazzling particles of fighting were shattered in his palm. Boom! Qin Hao was sent flying forward with a kick, and he punched Zhang Wu again. "I haven't seen you in 600 years, and you've become like a beast." Zhang Wu seemed to be well aware of Qin Hao's talents and martial arts techniques in this life. He knew that by opening the power of the dragon and layering the imperial methods of the divine palace, Qin Hao's will of the Wei at this moment was absolutely terrifying among the unblemished imperial paths. It was not much worse than nirvana. Not daring to be careless, Zhang Wu stepped back, steadied himself, and crossed his arms to protect himself. Boom! There was an incomparably violent sound of a heavy blow. Even though he was prepared, Qin Hao's punch was still stronger than expected. Zhang Wu's body involuntarily flew back again, and his 2 feet drew a dazzling luster in the air. His internal organs were almost shaken. "It hurts." Qin Hao knocked back the sunset battle god with a punch, and his scale-covered fist felt pain that he had not felt in a long time. He looked forward and found that Zhang Wu's mighty armor was rippling, as if it was an array. "My armor is very precious, and there are few in the Emperor realm who can break it. Based on your ability, if you want to break my armor, I'm afraid you'll have to take out the red arrow or that cauldron." Zhang Wu retreated dozens of meters before stopping. He rubbed the armor on his arm. It really hurt. Qin Hao was actually able to cause Zhang Wu's arms to go numb, even though they were separated by a set of divine-grade protective equipment. It seemed like being trapped in the divine wilderness for a period of time had not only weakened the Pill Emperor's strength, it had also weakened him, the battle world's God King. It was all thanks to the group of immemorial gods. "Show me your true strength. If you don't enter the heartless, soulless, and senseless state of the honest battle scripture, you won't be able to last long against me," Qin Hao said in a low voice. "You know about the honest battle scripture?" Zhang Wu's heart suddenly trembled, and his expression was one of surprise. Did Qin Hao remember something? "I don't know. You never told me how to cultivate this set of battle intent." Qin Hao only knew the name, and did not know where Zhang Wu learned it from. In his previous life, Zhang Wu also did not reveal the cultivation method to him. But this cultivation method was very domineering. So that's how it is. Zhang Wu thought that Qin Hao remembered something. He let out a long sigh and nodded. "That's right. If I don't enter the heartless, soulless, and senseless state and abandon my 6 senses and 9 senses, I won't be able to last long against you. Then, are you ready to receive the battle intent sublimation attack technique?" Chapter 1921. Taste, hearing, smell, touch, sight, and perception. He had abandoned the 6 senses. No thoughts, no desires, no heart, no spirit. He had abandoned the 9 senses. This was the highest level of the art of honest battle. He had transformed into an absolute killing machine and could only fight, tasteless and soundless. Zhang Wu's eyes became sharp, and his temperament changed. He clenched his fists and shook them. Strong battle intent particles appeared. He rushed forward and punched heavily at Qin Hao. Qin Hao's dragon soul power increased, and dragon roars came from his body. He punched out with his scaly fist. The sunset battle god rushed over quickly, but he was sent flying even faster. The 2 fists collided, and 2 terrifying rules of light flashed. Zhang Wu snorted and retreated. The light in his eye rings flashed, and the black pupils disappeared. They condensed into a pair of bright golden eyes, and the focus of the light was even more intense. He had abandoned the sense of sight. He had lost the senses of the naked eye and locked onto his opponent with his battle intent. Everything he saw was more real and clear. Boom! Terrifying sound waves exploded, and the light particles radiated from Zhang Wu's body. His battle intent continued to increase. He and Qin Hao turned into 2 rays of light and flew forward. They collided, and violent roars echoed in this region. He had abandoned the 3 senses and was already able to resist the explosion of Qin Hao's dragon soul. Senseless, colorless, ignorant. Chanting after chanting came out of Zhang Wu's mouth. When one entered the realm of ignorance, one did not know fear, nor did one sense danger. At this moment, the sunset battle god seemed to have transformed into a crazy battle maniac. Every time he threw a punch, the great path would be destroyed in the particles of his fist will. Cracks of light kept appearing in the matrix realm, and countless particles of fighting will seeped out from the cracks. It was almost unable to withstand the explosion of Zhang Wu's will. Gradually, Qin Hao began to struggle in the battle, and then he became weak. Facing Zhang Wu's crazy punches that did not know fear or danger, he became more and more powerless. Boom! Finally, the 2 intertwining lights separated with a loud bang. Qin Hao crashed into the bounded domain. The scales on half of his body were shattered, and his skin was cracked. A patch of watery light quickly covered and nourished him, and his dragon scales grew back continuously. So strong, Qin Hao could hear the howling of the astral wind in his ears. His body could not stop at all, and he felt intense pain all over his body. In their impression, Zhan Wu was indeed very strong when he was in a frenzy. In their previous life, none of the opponents they had met could last more than 3 breaths under Zhan Wu's attacks. In many cases, they were killed with a single punch. For this reason, Qin Hao once joked that if there was anyone in the East Continent who could defeat him without using the Sunset Arrow, it would be Zhan Wu. Who would have thought that the Zhan Wu he faced after his reincarnation was even stronger and crazier than he remembered? No thought. Zhan Wu witnessed Qin Hao being sent flying. The image transmitted back to his mind was very clear. He could even feel the frequency of the serene water while flowing on Qin Hao's body and analyze the extent of his injury. But for Zhan Wu, it was as if he did not feel anything. His breath was getting colder and colder. Swoosh! Zhan Wu disappeared from his original position. In the space, there was a terrifying breath madly approaching Qin Hao. Once he completely abandoned his 9 senses and entered a state of no mind and no spirit, Zhan Wu would no longer be Zhan Wu. Water, wind, divine flash. Not good. The surging danger came at an unimaginable speed. Qin Hao's emperor physique was damaged, and he had lost a lot of energy. He had yet to recover with the tranquil nether water, but Zhan Wu did not give him any chance to catch his breath. If this continued, the person who would not be able to last long in this battle would become the Dan Emperor. Swoosh! A sharp jade-green light flashed through the domain. At the same time, the setting sun battle god that had just arrived in front of Qin Hao was sent flying by a sword strike. A pale white sword mark was immediately branded on his divine armor that glowed with light. Great Void Divine Weapon. Zhan Wu lowered his head and looked at his chest. It could even leave a mark on a divine armor. It was obvious how powerful the sword was, but there was no pain on his face. After abandoning his 6 senses, Zhan Wu could not feel anything. Huff, huff. Qin Hao floated on one side of the bounded domain, holding the Great Void Divine sword in his hand. He panted heavily and beads of sweat flowed down the scales on his face. It was too fierce. If he did not use the divine weapon, he would not be able to stop Zhan Wu's violent attacks. Qin Hao's 10,000 spirit fire eyes flashed. The flame patterns emitted a sharp light of the great path. He stared at Zhan Wu's divine armor. This armor was definitely not ordinary. In fact, Qin Hao should not have been so strenuous in this battle. Zhan Wu's divine armor had neutralized the power of his Tao. On the other hand, Zhan Wu had been strengthened by the honest battle scripture and could break through Qin Hao's dragon scales. This was the reason why Qin Hao was at a disadvantage. Ah, you took out a divine weapon so quickly. You are weaker than I expected. This is not a good sign. Zhan Wu looked at the mark on his chest. As his palm brushed past, the white mark quickly disappeared. The armor was still as shiny as before. So, you also have a divine weapon. Did you get it in the Valley of the Buried God? Qin Hao asked. It was a defensive, divine-level protective gear. What difference does it make whether I tell you or not? Next, I hope your nomological laws will not be too disappointing. Zhan Wu snorted coldly. His figure moved forward. Every step he took was as ethereal as a shadow. It was impossible to predict his attack angle. Water-wind steps. Qin Hao gritted his teeth and let go of the divine sword in his hand. A series of cryptic spells came out of his mouth. Buzz. A layer of purple-gold light spread out from the great void sword. In the light, the sword turned into a tripod and revealed its true form. If he wanted to defeat Zhan Wu, it would be difficult to rely on swordsmanship. Qin Hao is naturally best at alchemy, including refining people. He wanted to use alchemy to refine this world and activate the divine weapon to refine Zhan Wu. In an instant, when this layer of purple light that contained the might of the divine path spread out, Zhan Wu's ethereal figure was greatly hindered. The airflow in the domain was chaotic. He could not even step steadily. It was as if there was a gust of wind in front of him. He could not get close to Qin Hao at all. Freeze! Zhan Wu roared. The majestic aura of a god relic spread out from his armor. It resisted the raging airflow in the domain forcefully. It was like a 10,000-year-old giant rock at the bottom of the sea. His body stood firm. "Let's see how you're going to settle this," Qin Hao said in a hoarse voice. He clapped his palms in the air. Instantly, the turbulence above the divine great void cauldron became even more violent and turbulent. It was like a whirling blade chopping down. There was a series of clanging sounds as it exploded on Zhang Wu's divine armor. Poof! Zhang Wu's body kept shaking. After holding on for a long time, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His expression changed a little. This cauldron was a little overbearing. Perhaps its divine will have been weakened too much by time. It could also have been assimilated by the divine land's heavenly Tao. However, Zhang Wu knew that it was more because Qin Hao's alchemy skill was too powerful. After all, he was a primordial alchemist who had established himself in the Archean world. In short, it was a little tricky now. "I'll refine your divine armor first. Then, I'll refine you. Otherwise, I'll be letting way down." Qin Hao roared. He was extremely disappointed. Zhang Wu really dared to use Uncle Mu to nourish himself. "You should be letting yourself down first." Zhang Wu did not bother to talk nonsense. It was useless to say anything to Qin Hao now before he found himself again. Layers of battle spirit light particles kept flowing out of Zhang Wu's body through the godly king armor. They turned into a human-shaped light barrier around him in an attempt to block the divine might of the great void cauldron. Next, the sunset battle god walked toward Qin Hao step by step with bloodshot eyes. Although it was difficult to walk, he did not want to fail at the last step and be refined into the cauldron by Dendi. Dying outside the domain, in the vast battlefield of the Sunset Peak, Ancestor Sea-Treading Sea let out an explosive roar. In front of him, the true self-general of the Sunset Peak, Gu Che, was being crushed by reefs one after another. His body was bent into the shape of a bow, and the sound of bones breaking constantly rang out from his body. It seemed that his spine was being crushed by Ancestor Sea-Treading Sea's will of Tao. He screamed in extreme pain. Boom! Then, Patriarch Sea Treader opened his palms wide. One seal after another circled around him, exuding the power of the sea. He pointed a finger forward, and the seals flew out in a single line, bombarding Gu Che's body and piercing through his back. No! Gu Che screamed in terror, echoing throughout the battlefield. As dozens of reefs came crashing down from above, his body exploded with a bang, turning into a thick splatter of blood that vanished into the void. Gu Che, the divine general of Sunset Peak, had fallen. Perhaps even Gu Che himself did not think that he would die in the moment of his death. Phew! Patriarch Sea Treader breathed a sigh of relief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Gu Che was a true self-great emperor after all, and his talent was not lacking. If not for his shallow cultivation, it would have been hard to say who would have won. But in the end, Patriarch Sea Treader had won. Patriarch Sea Treader sensed that Gu Che's aura had completely dissipated, and his spirit had melted away as well. He glanced at the realm light that enveloped Qin Hao and the sunset battle god, and a trace of worry flashed through his eyes. He didn't know to what extent Dendi and the battle god had fought in the realm light, and whether or not they had the upper hand. Unfortunately, Patriarch Sea Treader couldn't see through the realm light, so the next thing he could do was continue to expand the advantage of the Northern Territory Army and kill the other Sunset Peak divine generals. Old geezer Wuya, you can't hold on any longer. Hurry up and die. At the same time as Gu Che's death, Patriarch Wuya, who was being attacked by Lame Hu, sect leader Su, and sect leader Hu, was also in a desperate situation. Ancestor Wuya roared again and again. He actually utilized the power of Tao insight to activate the seal of mountains and seas. The seal of mountains and seas transformed into a towering mountain that protected him. He shrank back within it, and traces of panic appeared on his face as he attempted to make a final struggle. It's no use. Look at the power of my immortal sect chess. Lame Hu and the two sect leaders looked at each other. The three of them had a tacit understanding and used the same set of immortal sect incantation at the same time. Buzz! The immortal gate formation chess piece flew over in response, and it started to revolve around the sea of mountains. Strands of ferocious Tao inside energy were like terrifying chisels that chiseled mountain rocks, and they ceaselessly shook out pieces of shattered rocks from the mountain. Sect leader who? Let's talk things over. In fact, there is no enmity between us. Inside the mountain, Patriarch Wia's expression changed drastically. He abandoned his identity and took the initiative to ask for peace. The strength of the Tao power that erupted from the three true self-great emperors using the same cultivation technique was not something that a true self-great emperor could resist. This time, even the ancestral treasure of the celestial cliffs, the seal of mountains and seas, would not be able to protect him. No enmity, my ass. You just wanted to kill my immortal sect's disciples. I'll end you now. Lemu cursed. Did he think that he could sit back and relax just because he joined the Sunset Battle God? Patriarch Wia was such a fool. He really shouldn't have gone against the immortal sect. He dared to endanger the immortal sect. Wasn't he looking down on him and deliberately seeking death? Chapter 1922. Immortal light exploded and swept out in a dazzling manner. Huzu, sect leader Su, and sect leader who moved in unison and attacked in the same order. As the immortal light flew out from their hands, surging Tao intent converged on the Tao flag and poured into the Tao flag. Suddenly, the immortal flag bloomed with unparalleled brilliance, flying around the hammock sea peak at high speed, bringing with it sharp rays of the great path. As the rays of light cut through the mountain, the enormous mountain was cut apart layer by layer, continuously disintegrating. Boom! There was a violent explosion. The hammock sea peak shattered. Die! Huzu roared. A huge palm print flew forward, intending to kill Patriarch Wia. Patriarch Wia reacted extremely quickly. Taking advantage of the moment when the hammock sea peak collapsed, he turned into a ray of light and fled into the void, abandoning the battlefield. Old man, Huzu's palm strike missed. Looking at the escaping ray of light, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. Patriarch Wia had actually managed to escape. Buzz. However, at this moment, a dazzling golden light flew out from somewhere in the void. It was incomparably fast, piercing through space and smashing into old ancestor Wuya in a timely manner. The Supreme Emperor weapon contained a monstrous amount of Tao energy, smashing old ancestor Wuya's head into pieces. Instantly, he let out a shrill scream as he clutched his bleeding face. Puffed. The sword light pierced through Patriarch Wuya's chest with great precision. The surging sword chi crushed the true self Great Emperor's heart, tearing it to pieces along with his divine soul. Yu, Patriarch Wuya's face was covered in blood. He pointed at the Sword Emperor in front of him. The one who killed you is Makamanji of the southern region. Makamanji said. He pulled back the Supreme Emperor sword and waved his hand. The chaotic essence dipper, the ancestral treasure of the martial Ning Empire, flashed across the sky and returned to his palm. He turned and attacked the other battles. Patriarch Wuya was dead. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The turbulent winds of the Great Path turned into a vortex that raged between heaven and earth, frantically blocking the attacks from the outside. However, as a white Emperor's shadow pierced through, the winds of the Great Path disintegrated and turned into clouds. Junfei, Wu Shirarun, Wind Ancestor shouted. Die! The Lord of Azure Island pressed both of his palms down at the same time. Endless torrents rained down, drowning out the Wind Ancestor's voice in the Northern Territory sea power. At the same time, Emperor Bai, who had broken through the Wind Ancestor's will, returned. His fists landed heavily on the Wind Ancestor's back, causing the Wind Ancestor to spit out blood. The Emperor's body was torn apart by the powerful fist force. The sacred sword Wind People's ancestor had fallen. Patriarch Feng Junfei burst into tears. While defending against Master Wu Huang's attacks, he reached out his hand and grabbed Dilly's shoulder. Then, he threw his son out of the battle. Father. The last thing Feng Gaishi saw was Feng Junfei's body being pierced through by Island Master Wu Huang's Sky Destroyer spear. He was the leader of the South, a powerful cultivator of the Wind people who had the chance to reach the Emperor's path of truth, but he died in the battle at the Sunset Peak. When I return, I will make sure all of you die with the Wind people. Feng Gaishi roared in a hoarse voice. His voice was full of regret. Unfortunately, you won't even have the chance to leave. A wisp of sword intent descended silently, coincidentally appearing in front of Feng Gaishi. A powerful sword intent storm exploded, turning into a sword blade storm that danced in the nine heavens. It was extremely shocking. It felt like Feng Gaishi had taken the initiative to run into the storm, seeking his own death. "It's you." The terrifying sword intent cut into his body, crushing his flesh and destroying his bones. It turned into thousands of sword lights that pierced through Feng Gaishi's divine soul. In front of him, Lin Feng stood there with a blank face, waiting for Feng Gaishi like a fool. Did he regret it? If he hadn't joined forces with Song Yao and deliberately bullied Xiaogua and the Shiliang people, if he hadn't provoked Qin Hao in the God Burial Ruins, and if he hadn't then, the Sacred Sword Wind people probably shouldn't have ended up like this today. It could only be said that he had brought this upon himself. Amitabha. In the distance, the head of the Vajra Institute, Shirtian Buddhist emperor, looked on helplessly as he witnessed the annihilation of one of the southern border's famous big shots. Even his brothers and sisters weren't able to escape. He couldn't help but sorrowfully recite the name of Buddha, and endless emotions gushed out from his heart. Amitabha. Jiao Miao and the other monks chanted Buddhist scriptures to appease the resentment of the thearchs who had fallen in this battle. This battlefield was covered in blood, and as far as the eye could see, it was filled with blood and sin. This was the decline of the martial path, and also the calamity of the divine wilderness. After this battle, it would take thousands of years for the East Continent to recover and return to the prosperity of the Five Realms. But all of this was something that Shirtian Buddhist Thearch, Dean Feng, and the four palace supremacies of Jixia Academy couldn't do anything about. Ebook Workshop, you want to kill old man? You two are not enough. At the impact zone of the two armies, Xianyuan Wutian of the southern region was extremely arrogant and domineering. He released the great path of gravity and crushed the lava fire spirit, causing the lava flames on his body to become weaker and weaker. Even if Sun God and Holy Emperor Jiang worked together, they couldn't do anything about it. Even the two true self-thearchs showed signs of being at a disadvantage. Boom! A monstrous heavy fist blasted out, and the lava fire spirit, which was already riddled with holes, collapsed. Sun God flew out from the flames in the sky, spitting out a large amount of blood. Holy Emperor Jiang wanted to use the poison path rules to trap Xianyuan Wutian. Unexpectedly, the other party used the great path of gravity to trap Holy Emperor Jiang, turning it into a heavy field. The extremely terrifying rules bombarded Holy Emperor Jiang, causing the top alchemist of the northern border to scream in unbearable pain. Senior Jiang, Sun God shouted hoarsely. He was still too weak. Xianyuan Wutian had stepped into the perfected true self realm 100 years ago, and his cultivation was not below that of Patriarch Ning. He had probably also comprehended a few unblemished paths, but his cultivation was not enough to break through the unblemished path. Now, he and Holy Emperor Jiang had tried their best to suppress the other party, but they were suppressed by Xianyuan Wutian after a long battle. There was really no other way. Boy from the Sage Hall, are you desperate? Then let old man bestow death upon you. Xianyuan Wutian's face was extremely deranged. A large hand released the rules of gravity, as if it was strangling Holy Emperor Jiang's throat from a distance. Then he punched again, and the terrifying might of the way spread along the void, crushing the bodies of countless war god guards along the way and bombarding the exhausted sun god. Buzz! However, a vast palm radiance also slapped out from the direction of the Yang spirit. Two streams of yellow and white intertwined with each other and collided with Xianyuan Wutian's fist force. Suddenly, the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. Surging light waves of the will of the way exploded, sweeping across an area of hundreds of miles. The space was full of faults. Countless soldiers of the Northland and the war god guards were pulled into the turbulence of space, and no longer had any signs of life. Xianyuan Wutian. A deafening roar appeared above his head. Li Xiuxing descended from the sky. His hands clenched into fists, and he smashed down on Xianyuan Wutian's head. Li Xiuxing, are you here to die as well? Xianyuan Wutian laughed wildly and swung his fist. A ray of dark light shot out and pulled Holy Emperor Jiang, smashing him to the side. Suddenly, his feet shook the air, and he went up against the sky. The Dark Emperor's light of true self condensed in his palm, and he slammed it wildly towards Li Xiuxing. Bang! The Great Path was destroyed. The killing power of the Xianhuang mantra turned into an extremely sharp airflow, penetrating the Great Path rules layer by layer and hitting into Xianyuan Wutian's head. Along with this, the falling sacred statue of Li Xiuxing suffered an extremely terrifying bombardment. Its body instantly flew back, and the two fists that were clasped together were directly shattered in the raging waves of dark light. One was crippled, and the other was dead. Damn it! Xianyuan Wutian's body stabilized in the void. Blood flowed down his forehead. He looked at the hole in the center of his chest that had been eaten by the flames. He could even see his beating heart. But soon his heart melted, along with his imperial body, spiritual soul, and will, all dissipated from the void. It was as if they had never been in the world. He didn't even have the chance to look at the light that swallowed up Dindi and the sunset war god. Seniorly, the sun god attacked and burned Xianyuan Wutian. His body rose and caught the seriously injured Li Xiuxing. Although Ancestrally had appeared to give Xianyuan Wutian a fatal blow, he had paid the price of two hands. People in the mortal world, as noble as the supreme among the emperors, could not regrow their limbs. Dead. Ha ha! Xianyuan Wutian, this dog, has looked down on me for a long time. In the end, didn't he die under the yellow mantra of the Li family? Dindi owes me. Li Xiuxing ignored his bare wrists and laughed heartily. Because his injuries were too serious, he fainted in the arms of the sun god. The rules are eroding his internal organs. Under the investigation of the sun god emperor, he found that the meridians in Ancestor Li's body were being invaded by a layer of overbearing black will. This was the rule that Xianyuan Wutian had broken into Li Xiuxing's holy emperor body. Ancestor Li's cultivation was profound. Although the invasion was not too fast, it would definitely not last long. Holy Emperor Jiang flew over, clutching his throat. He shook his head at the sun god without looking. Xianyuan Wutian's rule was too fierce. He couldn't save him. Qin Hao had to make a move. However, no one knew what Qin Hao's current situation was or whether he could defeat the Sunset War God. The Sun God could only hold the unconscious Ancestor Li and stand in the void with Holy Emperor Jiang, looking at the radiant light of the realm. He hoped that Qin Hao could come out soon. At this time, countless huge gaps and cracks appeared in the realm light. It was becoming more and more broken. Terrifying particles of fighting intent overflowed from it, and it seemed to be on the verge of collapse. However, very soon, some people found that the realm light was being nourished by majestic divine light. The cracks and holes were gradually being repaired, and the terrifying particles of fighting intent that overflowed were becoming fewer and fewer. This made many powerful figures in the Northland reveal a touch of joy. Although they couldn't see the situation inside, they could feel the will of Dindi and the Sunset War God based on the stability of the realm light. For now, Qin Hao should have the upper hand and suppress the Sunset War God's attack. Is the War God being suppressed? In the battle, Meng Xiang's tyrannical divine elephant fist shook off Yunro. Even he could feel that the War God's aura was shrinking. It was becoming smaller, not weaker. The light of the particles of fighting intent that overflowed from the holes in the realm light just now was more terrifying than when the War God attacked in the past. This proved that the War God's strength had been rising, but he still couldn't break the realm light. Obviously, he was firmly suppressed by Dendi. Could it be that the war god would lose? Chapter 1923. Wooling Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Immemorial Divine Seal. In the vast battlefield that surrounded Sunset Peak, the battle cries never stopped. In this battle, the various orthodoxies that formed the North Territory's great army with the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect sent cultivators who were all above the level of Renhuang. They ranged from overlord forces to second- and third-rate sections. There were tens of thousands of them, including almost half of the Renhuang in the East Continent. Currently, other than the 4 unblemished Immortal Marshal Hall and the Sunset Peak Commander Kuei Han, the North Territory gradually gained the upper hand in the battle against the True Self Realm and the Martial Emperors below Dao Validation. With the death of the Wind Ancestor, Ancestor Weia, Xinyuan Wutian, and many Sunset Peak Divine Generals, the North Territory's advantage became more and more obvious. There were signs of victory. Meng Xiang didn't know why the god of war started the battle. He was worried about Dendi, but he didn't hesitate to gamble with the war god temple, using the geniuses of the East Continent to pave a path of death. Meng Xiang faintly felt that this might have something to do with the divine path. Could it be that the sunset god of war was forcing Dendi to become a god? Meng Xiang couldn't be sure, but it was too cruel and cold-blooded to become a god in this way. The 30,000 war god guards and divine generals of Sunset Peak all became sacrifices of the divine path. If he didn't want to die, he had to fight with everything he had until he saw the truth of the world. Meng Xiang roared and strode forward with his sturdy body. He stared at Yin Ro and punched forward, bursting with divine elephant fist will. Elephants trumpeted in the sky. Between him and Yin Ro, only one was qualified to see the truth. Yin Ro's face was pale. Compared to when she first arrived at Sunset Peak, she was much paler. Meng Xiang's punches were ferocious, and his will was as stable as a mountain. He was a very difficult opponent to deal with. Fortunately, she didn't have to fight alone. At this time, Yin Ro began to retreat quickly, as if she was avoiding Meng Xiang's attack. It just so happened that at the same time, a beam of imperial radiance descended from the sky, and it stood between the dark elephant and Yin Ro. Peerlessly dazzling light bloomed out and condensed into a 9-level divine pagoda. The divine pagoda shot forward explosively while emanating surging Dao insight laws, and it collided with an enormous elephant that crushed through space. Instantly, both the divine pagoda and the enormous elephant were actually obliterated at the same time. Meng Xiang let out a muffled groan as his body swayed. He stared straight ahead and said, "Jin Shun." Was Yin Ro pretending to be weak to make him careless? "Now's the time," Yin Ro shouted. Her body exploded with the radiance of the celestial flower spell. Her 5 fingers were as hard as steel as she waved them forward, shooting out 5 flower-plucking hand imprints. These hand seals turned into 5 layers of claw lights and flew forward, striking onto Meng Xiang's body in the blink of an eye, grabbing onto his wrists, ankles, and throat respectively. Meng Xiang spread out his 4 limbs in the shape of the Chinese character and was caught in the air. "Meng Xiang, you're finished." Jin Shin's figure appeared, wearing the unique red armor of the West Kingdom Warring States. His hands dragged the domineering dragon sword that he had obtained from the Sword City of the Ruins, dragging a trail of sparks from the void as he slashed towards Meng Xiang's imperial body with all his might. "Just the 2 of you?" Meng Xiang's eyes were hazy with a layer of blood. His 4 limbs and throat seemed to be tightly gripped by someone. Blue veins protruded from his neck as an extremely violent elephant cry came out from his body. It was like a trapped divine elephant that wanted to break out of the cage. Just as Jin Shun rushed over, there was a violent sound in the void. Countless elephant shadows rushed out from Meng Xiang's body. His wrists, ankles, and throat made cracking sounds as if chains were being broken. He forcibly broke free from Yun Ro's restraint. He roared as endless light shrouded him. Meng Xiang seemed to have turned into the king of 10,000 deities and crashed towards Jin Shun. Die! Jin Shin's domineering dragon blade that was dragging in the void slashed up diagonally, exploding with boundless sword-will radiance. It slashed viciously on the elephant shadow, splitting a huge gash in Meng Xiang's body. Between heaven and earth, there was a tragic elephant cry. Then, Jin Shin's entire body flew backwards. The armor in front of his chest was completely shattered. He let out a furious roar as he fell towards the foot of the sunset peak. Suddenly, the earth shook and the mountains shook. Whoosh! A ray of sharp light penetrated Meng Xiang's back. The killing light that contained the rules of the great emperor of true self shattered his divine general armor, pierced his heart, and went through his chest. Puff! Meng Xiang raised his head and spat out boiling hot blood. Countless elephant cries resounded between heaven and earth. The will of the way that he exuded became weaker and weaker until the imperial light around him dimmed. His messy hair washed away his helmet. Not just the two of them. Zhou Wendy of the Great, Zhou Empire gritted his teeth at Meng Xiang. His trembling hand held the emperor's soul Chinchio brush. This attack was to avenge the fallen great Zhou. For the aristocratic families and officials of the imperial city. For the dignity of the great Zhou tribe. Meng Xiang should die. Zhou Wendy. Meng Xiang's face was full of pain, but there was no trace of regret in his eyes. Destroying the great Zhou Empire and massacring the city was the order of the god of war. He was just following orders. What was there to regret? At this point, Meng Xiang's head slowly turned and looked at the world light of the great path. In the end, he did not make it to the end. Was he not destined to witness the truth and the miracle? Meng Xiang's sorrowful laughter came out of his mouth. With a huge sword wound in his chest that was so deep that his bones could be seen, and his imperial heart that had been pierced and destroyed, he fell towards the foot of the sunset peak. His life was worth it. He had once been glorious. But he did not know if the god of war could make it to the end. Would he be able to leave with no regrets like him? Whoosh! Jin Shin's figure rose from the sky. Half of his armor was shattered. He caught Meng Xiang's body. Looking at the fallen Commander Luo, his gaze was complicated. He said, "Bury him. Meng Xiang is a real man." Zhou Wendy's face was full of hatred. His mouth opened several times, but in the end, he did not say anything. "It's up to you," Yin Ro said. If Jin Shun did not say to bury him, the battle at the Sunset Peak was so tragic that Meng Zhu would not be able to leave his body intact. In the next moment, the three of them looked at the world light. The situation was stable. The 30,000 divine guards had suffered heavy casualties. More than half of the divine generals had died in battle. The remaining ones were all injured. They were like cornered beasts and could not struggle for long. Now, they just had to wait for the result of Dindi and the Sunset Battle God. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Waves of powerful divine aura rushed out. In the world light, although Zhan Wu was trapped in Qin Hao's rules, he did not stop. He was approaching with difficulty. "Can you still hold on like this?" Qin Hao's expression was slightly bitter. The indestructible samsara technique resonated with the great void cauldron. Like a god in the world light, layers of ferocious divine power of rules intertwined. You've waited for 600 years. I've also waited for 600 years. How can we stop? Zhan Wu said in a hoarse voice. The battle intent particles that filled the divine armor on his body were not weak at all. Moreover, with the improvement of the honest battle scripture, the burst of battle intent and belief became stronger and stronger. Even the rules of the divine path could not stop Zhan Wu's footsteps. "Then you can go to hell," Qin Hao shouted in a hoarse voice. The will of the emperor roared and radiated, invading every inch of space. His palms danced, drawing out a force that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The turbulent flow of rules turned into a gust of wind that swept toward Zhan Wu's body. It lifted him into the air bit by bit and was sucked into the open cauldron. He wanted to use the cauldron to seal Zhang Wu and refine him. The Way of the Gods. Zhang Wu's face showed a rare ripple of emotion. There was a hint of surprise and excitement in his eyes. Did he remember? This was the immemorial divine sealing technique, the abhijna of the alchemy venerables. Qin Hao had used the divine sealing technique. No, he didn't get his memories back. It's just his instincts. Zhang Wu realized that Qin Hao's eyes were only filled with killing intent. It was the madness of wanting to destroy the enemy by any means necessary. It was not the memories of his first life. The sunset battle god's body was pulled up bit by bit, and the torrential flow of laws scraped against his body. The godly king armor on his body dimmed for the first time, and he felt an unparalleled divine might wrap around his body, slowly pulling him into the cauldron. No. Once he was sucked in, even though he was the first battle god of the ancient battle world, Zhang Wu did not have the confidence to survive. At this moment, a ray of green light was born in the bounded domain. It was awakened from Zhang Wu's body. The light became more and more dazzling until a navy blue arrow flew past and shot toward the great void cauldron. Hong. Qin Hao was shocked. It was the sunset arrow. Chapter 1924. The light of the navy blue arrow pierced through the boundary, leaving behind a sharp cold light that was 1,000 feet long. It went straight from Zhang Wu's position to the great void cauldron. The great void cauldron vibrated with surging divine Tao light waves. The power of precepts swept across, creating invisible walls of divine power in the space. However, it was still unable to stop the sunset arrow's forward speed. In an instant, there was a loud sound. The sunset arrow pierced through the boundary, creating terrifying sonic booms. It was nailed onto the great void cauldron. At this moment, the two divine weapons collided. Different precepts roared. The rebirth technique and the will of the god of war intertwined, forming a monstrous divine power that exploded and swept across the area. Crash! The domain, which was already in imminent danger, was completely destroyed. The violent divine force bounced back and slammed heavily onto Qin Hao's chest. Dan Monarch was blasted out from the broken realms. He flew for a few thousand feet, and the divine light he carried with him caused old ancestor D High, by Monarch, and the others to evade him. Who would dare to receive it? Death upon contact. Huff! Zhang Wu breathed heavily. His body was wrapped in intense battle particles. Beads of sweat dripped from his face. It was too dangerous. He was almost sealed into the cauldron by Qin Hao. At this moment, the battlefield gradually quieted down. Other than a few god of war guards and people from the North World orthodoxies, all the emperors and masters looked at Dende and the sunset battle god. Qin Hao's white robe was in tatters. He was suffering from the backlash of the precept's divine power. His aura was also very chaotic. Looking at the sunset battle god, he was still dazzling. His body was surging with battle particles. He was obviously in a much better state than Dende. Was Dende defeated? No, it was not over. Everyone saw that in the next second after Qin Hao stabilized his body, he put his palms together. A crimson arrow was born between his palms. As his palms slowly separated, the crimson light became more and more dazzling. The sunset god arrow was crimson red. The crimson arrow had always been nourished by Shao Han's Tao will. When the 100 Spirit Peak was in seclusion, Qin Hao took it back from Shao Han. Now, the great void cauldron had been nailed by Dian Hong, suffering from the double suppression of the arrows and Zhang Wu's fighting spirit. Qin Hao could only take out Qi Hong to compete with the sunset war god. After this arrow, let's see who will be the master of the divine wilderness. Qin Hao flipped the imperial rainbow sash over his shoulder. A huge golden ribbon of light stretched across the sky like a bowstring, knocking the crimson arrow. Senior Brother Chang Yu's Dharma artifact was very powerful, even among supremacy Dharch artifacts. But at the very least, it could support the Setting Sun Heart Sutra. Good. After this arrow, let's see who will rule the common people's path. Zhan Wu replied. Incomparably resplendent, divine, Tao radiance blossomed in front of him. He stretched his hand into it and pulled out a powerful golden bow from within the radiance. At the same time, another arrow appeared in his hand. This was an arrow that was as black as ink. It was suffused with a terrifying luster of particles. The third sunset arrow, Sha Xian. Zhan Wu knocked Sha Xian on the sunset bow. The moment he knocked Sha Xian on the sunset bow, an incomparably huge storm of fighting spirit swept across the sky with him as the light of calamity rolled across the void. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The scene was as if the end of the world had arrived. Zhan Wu stood there with the bow in his hand. The heavens seemed to have sunk because of him. Even the great path of the divine wilderness continent's heavenly Tao was descending, making his shadow grow larger and larger. It was boundless and majestic, as if a true God had descended upon the world. Retreat, all of you retreat. Bai Di, Grandmaster Hai Di, Hyuning, and the others were all panicking. They all ordered their orthodoxies to retreat from the battlefield. Not only the North Territories army, but the Sunset Peak's war god guards were also like this. It was as if two tides were rushing back to their respective formations. On the vast battlefield, only the Pill Emperor and the Sunset Battle God were left facing each other. At the end of the Emperor's path, who would be the peak? Once the Sunset path was emptiness. This was not referring to the Sunset War God, but to the Sunset Arrow. Under the Sunset Arrow, no emperor existed. For thousands of years, whether it was Qin Hao destroying the barbarians and establishing the Daqin Empire, or the southern region killing the blazing Sun Twin Emperors with a single arrow, or Zhan Wu killing the Lord of Flow Island, Yu Jing with a single arrow, the bloody scenes warned all the martial artists in the divine wilderness continent that they must not stand in front of the sunset arrow. Yao Yao Literature Network at this moment, countless people's hearts beat wildly, including Shi Tian, Dean Feng, Old Man Taya, and the others who were watching from the sidelines. They all led their disciples to retreat again and again. Without the Sunset Heart Sutra, do you think you can win against my crimson arrow? Qin Hao's body emitted a dazzling emperor light. His aura merged with the heavenly Tao. He stood in the void as if he had turned into an arrow god. You can try. Zhan Wu's voice was surprisingly calm. Swoosh, swoosh. The next moment, two beams of divine light shot out almost at the same time from the direction of the Sunset Peak and the North Territory Army to the center. Time seemed to have stopped. The faces of the emperors of the various forces were distorted. They held their breaths, and their hearts seemed to have stopped beating. They looked at the two beams of arrow light with horror. They couldn't use any words to describe their feelings. They could only say that the second the arrows flew out from Qin Hao and Zhan Wu's hands, all the experts' divine souls seemed to be nailed to the ground, and their minds went blank. They didn't resist and directly gave up struggling. They couldn't even muster the strength to resist. It was as if the arrow light carried the heavenly Tao's divine will. Mortals were like ants, only worthy of being buried. Swoosh, swoosh. Xiao Han, who was standing in front of the North Territory Army, clenched Bao Er's hand as his body trembled slightly. Bo Changji, Tao Ancestor, Wuk Feng Lan, Mu Yuwei, Zhu the Great, the four flawless immortals of the divine martial hall, including Kuei Han and Zhou Wudao and Ning Tianxing, who were trapped in the chessboard, all looked at this side through the void. They all forgot to fight. They saw that the red divine arrow was wrapped in a supreme divine power. Under the control of Qin Hao's skillful technique and mental cultivation method, it collided with the killing heart arrow of the sunset war god. There wasn't much of a violent explosion. With just a simple collision, the arrowhead of the red arrow shattered under the black light. Then, the arrow body and the arrow feathers gradually disintegrated and were scattered by the light of the fighting will particles. There was a buzzing sound. It was as if a gust of wind blew in front of Qin Hao. He swayed on his heels and leaned back slightly. A beam of black light, suffused with fighting will particles, penetrated his body. No! Xiao Han's voice was filled with tears. Crack! The divine souls of the emperors of the North Territory seemed to have been struck by a bolt of divine thunder. Their hearts were about to shatter at this moment. How could this be? The sunset arrow had become a weapon of mass destruction in the four territories because Qin Hao had first displayed its power. Later, Zhan Wu had inherited this set of arrows of the emperor's path of destruction. However, under the power of the arrow, why was the creator no match for the successor? This arrow not only penetrated Qin Hao's emperor's heart, but also all the emperors of the North Territory felt a chill run down their spines. Then they had lost. Big brother. Big brother. No. Xiaogua and the others cried and cried. With such a powerful destructive Dao power, even Qin Hao, who had the power of laws, would not be able to survive. After all, Qin Hao had not stepped into the true divine path. They couldn't bear it and couldn't accept it at all. Everyone felt as if the sky had collapsed. An indescribable pressure pressed down on their shoulders. It was so heavy and unbearable. No, no, father. Bao Er's tears streamed across the battlefield. She struggled under Xiao Han's hands and tried to rush toward Qin Hao. She had finally obtained this family affection, but she didn't even have the chance to properly feel her father's love before it vanished into thin air. Hearing Bao and the others' cries, Qin Hao suppressed the pain in his heart and slowly turned his head. He glanced at the people of the North Territory and finally fixed his gaze on Bao. At this moment, Qin Hao's expression was strangely calm. Apart from some pain, it was as if he didn't mind being hit by the sunset arrow at all. He also didn't care about the outcome of the battle between him and the sunset battle god. It was as if nothing else mattered to him. The only thing that could be considered normal was that there was a faint flash of regret in his eyes. But very quickly, that regretful luster disappeared. I'm content. Qin Hao smiled warmly at Bao. After all, he had taken care of this girl for decades. Unknowingly, he had already begun to treat her as his own daughter. It turned out that after being a puppet for a long time, one would also develop feelings. A teardrop fell from the corner of Qin Hao's eye. Endless fighting spirit particles surged out of his wound and began to burn his body. There was no pain, no shouts. He stayed there quietly, as if waiting for the arrival of fate. Chapter 1925. Dharma Idol was a profound and mysterious ancient divine ability that was infinitely magical. Since the beginning of the chaos, it had been passed down in the bloodline of the primordial gods. The gods of the primeval world called them the Alchemy Master Clan. This Dharma Idol technique could carry the will and most of the power of the original divine body. Then, with the help of a medium, it could be combined into a new life. It was like a puppet, but it was different from a puppet. Simply put, according to the mastery of the technique, when cultivated to the extreme, the caster could create a powerful existence that was almost the same as the original body. It could be said to be extremely heaven-defying. However, this medium spirit was extremely difficult to find. It needed to be similar to the original body's Tao and enough to support the original body's power. Then, it had to be carefully cultivated and trained by the caster to become a qualified Dharma idol. At first, Zhan Wu did not realize that the Dendi he was fighting with was Qin Hao's Dharma idol. During the battle, Zhan Wu wanted to force out Qin Hao's celestial source and restore the memories of the primeval world's alchemy master. He had put all his attention on the grand plan that he had been planning for thousands of years. How could he have known that Qin Hao would use an ancient technique to create a Dharma idol puppet? After all, this Dharma idol was too real. With Qin Hao's extraordinary skills that had been carved into his bones, it couldn't be called a puppet at all. Instead, it was a perfect replica of an alchemy emperor. It was only when the domain collapsed and the Dharma idol was sent flying by the divine weapon that the sunset battle god saw the flaw. Thus, he decisively shot an arrow through the opponent's imperial body. If that was really Qin Hao, Zhan Wu wouldn't have been able to deal a heavy blow. From the beginning to the end, I have not shed a single drop of blood. Although my abilities and temperament are similar, I have neglected my soul. Zhan Wu's mouth held a bitter smile. Compared to Qin Hao's original body, the soul of the Dharma idol lacked the confidence that it should have. It was even more lonely and cold. It was as if it had no meaning to the whole world and had no sense of belonging or nostalgia. On the contrary, although Qin Hao was also aloof, his aloofness reflected a kind of inherent arrogance, a kind of majestic bearing of a monarch overlooking the world. Who else but him? This was the difference between the two. He really didn't think that he, the grand number one war god of the primeval realm, would almost be tricked. Possessing a divine-grade armor and possessing an unparalleled ability to raise one's fighting spirit. This is definitely not a martial technique of the mortal world. Big brother, how much have you been hiding from me? Facing the sunset battle god's gaze, a crack appeared in the empty void. Instantly, divine light burst forth, and a figure slowly walked out from the light. When they saw this figure, the entire North Territory army was in an uproar. This person had the same appearance as Qin Hao. His height, build, silver hair, and temperament were all the same. The aura he exuded was even stronger than the former, and he had the air of a king. Everyone was incomparably shocked. They first looked at Dindi, who was burning with fighting spirit, and then looked at this person. They all rubbed their eyes, including Xiao Han. It was simply impossible to distinguish the real from the fake. This, Bao, or stopped struggling and was stunned in Xiao Han's arms. Which one was her real father? She could feel that the Dindi, who was on the verge of death, exuded an aura she was incomparably familiar with. He was definitely her father, who had been accompanying her at 100 Spirit Peak. On the contrary, Qin Hao, who had appeared later, gave Bao a faint sense of unfamiliarity. But if he was a fake, why did the blood connection in her heart feel even stronger than the first one? Moreover, the two of them looked exactly the same. Even Bao's fire spirit, I couldn't tell them apart. I'm a little confused. Xiao Han's brows were tightly knitted together. Even she couldn't recognize him. If she had to recognize one, Dindi, who had walked out of the spatial crack, was more like the Qin Hao in her impression. He exuded an invisible sense of security and was calm and collected in handling matters. That's right, this was the real Qin Hao. Kill. Boom. A surging halberd beam tore through space and, with the might of an army, crushed Jinye's domineering saber, pushing his body down from a height of 100,000 feet. Upon seeing the appearance of another Qin Hao, Qin Yun felt relieved. Furthermore, if one of them wasn't real or fake, there was no doubt that one of them was the real one. What he needed to do now was to bring Seacombe Shu's murderer to justice. A life for a life. Blood spewed out from beneath Zhanye's helmet as he tried his best to condense his laws into his domineering saber in an attempt to withstand Qin Yun's Dao intent strike. 186 Chinese network, but at this moment, a violent bolt of lightning rushed over from a certain direction. A pair of fists wrapped in terrifying lightning heavily slammed into Zhanye's body. Terrifying laws wreaked havoc as his armor was blasted apart inch by inch. Die! Lei Jiao pulled at the void with his left hand as a blinding sacred light twirled around his hand. As the eldest disciple of Lei Chuan's Judgment Hall, he had mastered the lightning and light dual thearch's ultimate arts. His martial arts and primordial skills were equally ferocious. His hand blades sliced through the shattered armor and into Zhanye's Tharch body. Zhanye's blood boiled to the extreme as the lightning in his body intertwined and wreaked havoc. His soul was about to be torn apart. Against Qin Yun and Lei Jiao's pincer attack, the exhausted Zhanye had no way of resisting. At this critical moment, an incomparably powerful saber beam flew from the sky and landed on Zhanye's head. The thick dilly enveloped him as a domineering force swept across Lei Jiao's body, sending him flying backwards. Boom! The deafening war drums stopped as the mighty military might was destroyed by the saber intent. Qin Yun's attack was forcefully interrupted as he held onto the Xianyuan halberd and staggered backwards in a sorry state. It was too powerful. The saber intent that descended contained the might of the heavenly Tao. It was at the level of a flawless Archlord. Stop it. An imposing figure appeared above Zhanye's head. Wisps of pure saber intent flowed into the wounds all over his body, nourishing his emperor qi and suppressing the power of rules of Qi Xiaogua, Lei Jiao, Qin Yun, and Lian Han. Immediately, one of the four flawless thearchs of the divine martial hall, Wu Dao, waved his hand and swept away Zhanye's broken helmet, revealing a familiar face. How could this be? Boom! Lei Jiao and the others were shocked. It was Zhanye. Creak! Qin Yun gripped the Xianyuan halberd tightly as he stared at Zhanye. Although he had vaguely guessed his opponent's identity, he still did not stop because Zhanye had killed someone. Don't hate him. He was just following orders. Everything was arranged by us. You will know the truth soon. Bladeless slowly raised his hand and took off his helmet. His black and white hair hung down loosely, and his face was filled with fatigue. Little brother. From afar, Zhang Guang he called out in a daze. Seeing the face of the person he had grown up with, he could not hold back his tears and snot. Big brother, long time no see. Zhanlong smiled warmly. As Zhanlong finished speaking, the flawless thearchs of the divine martial hall who were standing in the void revealed their true faces. The flawless thearch who was fighting Feng Lan with the dust Taoist was Xin Qiue's ancestor, Xin Yu. The wind one who had forced Mu Yue to retreat with his thearch technique was Yu Feng. Old man, let's fight again next time. The phantoms of the palaces that filled the sky dissipated. The lanky youth who trapped the Dao ancestor with the Dao of formation took off his helmet and said loudly, I'm Qing Cheng, one of the four divine generals under Great Qin's Pill Emperor. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the North Territory's army exploded into huge waves. Ancestor Stomper C, Emperor Bai, and the others were shocked out of their wits. Qing Cheng, how could it be you? Mu Yue said in shock. Sister Wei Wei, I'm very sorry about Uncle Mu. How should I explain it to you? Qing Cheng paused and looked at the sunset battle god and Qin Hao. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on the battlefield in front of them again. Their hearts were beating wildly. The four divine generals of the state under Dendi were convicted of treason and were exiled by the sunset battle god and Empress Ling Xian. Who would have thought that they had turned into the four divine generals of the divine martial hall of the Sunset Peak and served the sunset battle god for hundreds of years? What exactly was going on? Everyone's hearts were in a daze. Zhanlong and the others turned into the four divine martial hall and secretly taught Bao cultivation methods and gave her the royal thunder soul to help her reach the top of the 9-pulse martial arts competition. Big brother, where did Zhanlo and Zhugexiu go? How long do you want to hide it from me and the world? Qin Hao's eyes were a little wet. He did not know why Zhanwu did all this. He did not hesitate to kill 30,000 divine guards and divine generals of the Sunset Peak. Chapter 1926. The intense light of fighting spirit burned brightly. Amidst the surging particle laws, the body of Dharma idol became more and more illusory, as if it would disappear in the next moment. Sha Xian's arrow was infused with Zhan Wu's power of the god of war. It pierced through the Tao soul of the dragon spirit, leaving it no chance of survival. In the eyes of Zhan Wu, it was not allowed to exist, even if it was just a copy of Dendi. At this time, Qin Hao's palm brushed past the burning light of fighting spirit. The illusory body of Dharma idol was drawn out from it. Like an empty soul, it followed Qin Hao's head and overlapped with his imperial body. The two became one. At this moment, a roar came from the huge mountain of Sunset Peak. A beam of incomparably sacred flowing light flew out from the peak and rushed toward Qin Hao. Like a child returning home, it also merged into his body. Buzz! Layers of Emperor's light of the Great Path surrounded Qin Hao's body. He slowly closed his eyes. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, his body underwent a huge change. The pressure of will grew stronger and stronger, and a terrible roar shook the heaven and earth. The Golden Emperor's light surrounding Qin Hao suddenly divided into 9. Cyan, green, blue, orange, red, purple, yellow, the incomparably dazzling yuan qi of the 9 realms of martial arts, like layers of gorgeous heavenly light and rainbows, began to wildly surge around Dendi. At the same time, his emperors will radiated. The sweeping pressure caused the spiritual souls of the emperors to tremble violently. The vault of the East Continent also shook violently, as if the sky was collapsing. Everyone seemed to hear the roar of the heavenly path in their ears. This is the hearts of ancestor High Stomper, Emperor Bai, Hyuning, Makamanji, and countless other emperors shook violently. When Qin Hao opened his eyes again, his aura had completely merged with the roar of the heavenly path in everyone's ears. It was as if that was his will. At the same time, an aura of the great path that suppressed all things permeated the space. It was so powerful that it was difficult to measure. This aura was completely different from the flawless Emperor's path. It could not be hidden at all and was exposed to everyone's senses. With Qin Hao's every move, a simple look, and even a strand of his hair fluttering, this aura that could suppress all things was reflected on his body, rising and falling with him. This was what it meant to be a true pinnacle expert, one who was naturally strong. But what realm was this? Nirvana, Bo Changji muttered. The Tao ancestor, who had always been calm, did not hide the excitement in his eyes. The fourth stage of the Emperor's Tao, Nirvana. Nirvana represented rebirth. No matter if it was crippling one's foundation and rebuilding one's body, crippling one's cultivation and recultivating one's Tao, or even exhausting one's life force and reigniting one's life force. It was a type of nirvana. There were many ways to reach nirvana from the unblemished realm. Qin Hao chose the most extreme method, which was to gamble his life to break through. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. Of course, the gamble was the life of Dharma. He and Dharma shared the same Tao, and their techniques were of the same origin. Dharma used death to gain enlightenment, and the result fell on Qin Hao. It was undeniable that this was the fastest and most violent way to break through. It was exactly the same as Shou Wu's method of entering the unblemished realm, crossing the martial path's destiny. But from then on, he lost his Dharma. Ha ha! Zhan Wu's low laughter slowly came out of his throat. In an instant, it turned into a sad laugh. It was not because he was happy for Qin Hao. His face was full of helplessness. He looked at Zhang Lang and the others and said, "You guys, in the end, all my efforts were in vain. Thousands of years of planning and 3 generations of hard work. Today was Denda's last chance to return to the divine path. But what he hoped for was a small nirvana. In the end, Zhang Lang and the others did not have the heart to fight to the end. All his hard work was in vain." Still not willing to say? Qin Hao did not understand the meaning behind Zhan Wu's laughter. He looked at him and said, "Even if you don't say it, I can guess where Lu and Zhuge Xiu went. Qin Imperial City." Zhan Wu used Zhan Lu and Zhuge Xiu as shields. He wanted to build a wall between Sunset Peak and Qin Imperial City to prevent Han Lingxian from taking advantage of the situation. However, Qin Hao could not understand why Zhan Wu was so proficient in the sunset cultivation technique. "How would I know where they went? And why should I tell you? Are you very familiar with them?" Zhan Wu said coldly. The strong fighting spirit particles on his body rolled again. "Come, our battle is not over yet. Killing a puppet is not an achievement. I want to defeat Dendi and become the true master of the divine wilderness. Only the war god will reign supreme in the world." Waving his hand to recall the heart-killing arrow, Zhan Wu did not give Qin Hao any time to react. He knocked the bowstring, drew the sunset bow, and pulled back the arrow. A beam of terrifying black light with fighting spirit particles penetrated Qin Hao's emperor's heart. "Be careful," Xiao Han reminded, who knew that Qin Hao did not even look at it. He activated the reincarnation arts in his body and raised his hand to grab it. With a creak, the threatening black arrow was firmly grasped in his palm. As strands of resplendent sunset cultivation technique, Tao, will snaked up, the killing power contained in the black heart killing arrow immediately disintegrated and dissipated. Buzz! Somewhere in the void, the great void, cauldron vibrated. Qin Hao's palm absorbed the arrow through the air. Under the resonance of the reincarnation arts, the cauldron and the red Dian arrow suddenly separated and turned into a dazzling emerald shadow. He pointed his finger forward. With an ear-piercing sound, the beam of sword light cut Zhang Wu's waist. Endless heavenly light burst out from Qin Hao's body and merged into the divine sword. It created intense sparks with the armor on Zhang Wu's body, as if it wanted to grind the armor to pieces. Finally, as a line of blood flew past, the great void divine sword flew past. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. Zhang Wu flew past, circled in an arc, and fell into Qin Hao's palm. No matter what the purpose is, you should bear this sword for Uncle Mu. The corner of Qin Hao's mouth trembled as he spoke. He watched as blood seeped out from Zhang Wu's armor. There was an almost undetectable sword mark there that was forcefully torn open by the great void divine sword. This sword really cut open a wound on Zhang Wu's emperor body. God of War, Big Brother Zhang Wu. The remaining God of War guards dragged their injured bodies and rushed towards Zhang Wu's position. Zhang Lang, Yu Feng, and the other two did the same. Before the sunset God of War fell to the ground, they tried their best to hold him up. Their expressions were unbearable. Buzz! The light particles that enveloped Zhang Wu's body suddenly disintegrated. The God of War's original appearance was revealed in front of everyone. Blood flowed from his pale lips. He looked at Qin Hao, who was at the end of the Emperor Road, and nodded painfully. That's right. I should bear this sword. However, it was a pity that even if Uncle Mu sacrificed his life, he would not be able to restore the fourth reincarnation that he had painstakingly built for the Elixir Emperor. This was Qin Hao's last chance to prove himself before his soul dissipated. Qin Hao turned his face away. He didn't dare to look at Zhang Wu's eyes. How could he not be responsible for Mu Xinjiao's death? After all, when Peng Lai's instrument deity died, Qin Hao watched it happen. He had the chance to stop it, but he didn't. Once he did, the battle at Sunset Peak and the North Territory's entire plan would be disrupted. If Zhang Wu should bear it, Qin Hao should bear it more than Zhang Wu. That was why he didn't dare to look at Zhang Wu's eyes. Why is it you? Uncle's simple-minded. Bao, or had just endured the illusion of Qin Hao's death when she suddenly saw the sunset God of War's true body. It was the simple-minded uncle who had always accompanied her on a remote island in the Hundred Spirit Sea realm. At this moment, Bao Er's mind seemed to collapse. The Sunset Peak's arrogant God of War guards that everyone in the East Continent respected was actually the simple middle-aged man who planted herbs on the entire island. How could Bauer accept this? The Sunset God of War was an evil person. She couldn't associate him with the simple-minded uncle. Don't cry. It doesn't hurt. Zhang Wu's face grew paler and paler. He didn't know what had happened, but after being hit by the sword, his aura began to weaken rapidly. His face was also rapidly aging. Originally, there were only a few strands of silver hair on his temples, but now, his white hair was visibly growing longer. His imperial body was also shrinking. His tall and sturdy body was becoming thinner and weaker. Even the majestic divine king armor couldn't set off the majesty of the God of War. He was like a weak old man being supported by Zhang Lang and the others. It was as if the unblemished great emperors could turn him into dust with just a little bit of force. End of chapter. Chapter 1927. How could this be? God of War. Zhang Lang, Qin Cheng, and the other wounded God of War guards were all shocked. They helped Zhang Wu to sit down carefully. As a large amount of fighting will particles flowed out of the wound and spread into the void, the Sunset God of War's aura weakened and his life was fading rapidly. It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. Qin Hao was panicking. He had only been hit once. Even if the law of reincarnation had invaded his body, with Zhang Wu's foundation and the power of the God of War, this injury was not fatal. It was not even serious. But why? Uncle Han, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Seeing Zhang Wu turn from a strong middle-aged man to a head full of white hair, Bauer could not help but fly over from the North Territories Army. She squatted in front of Zhang Wu and cried. She reached out her trembling hands, but did not know what to do. It's okay. Your father didn't mean to hurt me. It's okay. Zhang Wu tried to force a smile. He wanted to wipe away Bao Er's tears, but he realized that he could not even lift his hand. He did not know when the armor on his body had become so heavy. Go away. Qin Hao pushed Zhang Lang and the others away. He bent down and placed his finger on Zhang Wu's wrist. In the next moment, his face turned pale. Zhang Wu's Emperor Qi was dissipating, and his will of Tao was dissipating. Through the sword wound caused by the reincarnation technique, it was converging towards the heavenly Tao. However, this was only on the surface. The main reason for his aging was that his life force had dried up. No, in other words, Zhang Wu had long lost his life force. His body was completely filled with Tao. His skin was damaged and could not stop the Tao from flowing out. Once the fighting will particles in his body disappeared, he would cease to exist. The sunset god of war, who shocked the 5 realms of the East Continent, was actually a living dead. Big brother, Qin Hao shouted. His eyes were misty, and he looked like he was struggling. You still won't tell me? Even at this time, you still won't tell me everything? He did not know what the problem was. According to Zhang Wu's lifespan, he should have been able to live for hundreds of years. However, he was completely sure that the sunset war god before him had died many years ago, and he was actually supported by the will and Tao insight he'd left behind when he was alive. But according to the current situation, Zhang Wu would not be able to hold on for long before his Tao will dissipated and his will would cease to exist. Even Qin Hao would not be able to save him, because Zhang Wu had died a long time ago. It's no longer important whether you know or not. Perhaps this is the best ending for you. My only regret is that I won't be able to protect you in the future. Zhang Wu's voice was filled with endless vicissitudes. He couldn't go back. In the end, he couldn't. He was clearly powerless, yet he still forced himself to hold on. He was obsessed with the past. This was the end he deserved. But even if his soul was destroyed, he had no complaints. That was good too. Although the divine wilderness was bad, at least Qin Hao had reached the top. In the future, without his care, Qin Hao would not be bullied by others. Was I wrong? I was wrong from the start. Qin Hao lowered his head in pain. The memories of his 2 lives surged in his mind. He tried to find everything about Zhang Wu and him, but the images he saw were mostly fragmented fragments and all the bad aspects of Zhang Wu. The scene that was engraved in the deepest part of his soul was the destruction of the imperial body in the Valley of the Burial God, as well as the rise of the sunset war god and Empress Ling Xian. What exactly went wrong? Who could tell me answer? 10,000 years of protection, but it was destroyed in a single day. Even if you have to leave, at least leave them with some beauty. Forget it. Even I can't bear to see it. Let me tell you the answer. On the towering divine peak, the huge phantom of the divine phoenix soared into the sky and circled in the 9 heavens. Then, it turned into a beam of flame of the great path and landed on the battlefield. As the flames retreated, a woman stood in front of Qin Hao and the others. Senior sister. Qin Hao looked at the woman, and the shock in his eyes could not be any greater. It was Muri of the Migres Peak. However, Muri's condition was very poor. She had lost her imperial body of flesh and blood, and what appeared in front of everyone was an illusory, spiritual soul. Why bother? Muri's spiritual soul glanced at the white-haired old Zhang Wu, and then nodded at Qin Hao with a smile. Junior brother, congratulations. You have finally reached the supreme realm that Master and all the other Uncle Masters have reached, the nirvana of the Imperial Way. I would rather not have this nirvana. Qin Hao was very emotional. If he had known that this battle would cost Zhang Wu his life, he would rather not have fought. Even if Zhang Wu left him with an evil face and a living dead body, he would let this living dead body continue to do evil in the East Continent. Childish. Muri chuckled and let out a long sigh. Senior sister, what's going on? Where's your imperial body? Xiao Han flew over and asked. It's destroyed, Muri said, her eyes sweeping across the vast battlefield in front of her, looking at the countless corpses of the war god guards floating in the void. Just like them, it's destroyed. However, I'm considered lucky. Zhang Wu used his fighting spirit to resist the laws of the heavenly Tao, and with the nourishment of the spirit Qi of the sunset Tao peak, it delayed the time for the heavenly Tao to melt my spiritual soul. At least, I'm still alive for now. However, the spiritual souls of the countless god guards and god generals did not exist. Senior sister, tell me everything. I can fix it, Qin Hao said anxiously, seeing Zhang Wu's aura getting weaker and weaker, and the old body in the armor was even more illusory than his senior sister. His tone was pleading. You can't even save yourself. How can you save all of us? Muri said, Don't say any more. Zhang Wu pleaded. Muri ignored Zhang Wu and continued. Actually, I don't know much. Only when Zhang Wu is tired and can't take it anymore would he talk to me for a while. According to him, the two of you are not from the divine wilderness. This, Bai Di and the others were shocked. Qin Hao was also stunned. Due to certain reasons, you and Zhang Wu left your home and ended up in the lower realms. Before this, you already suffered extremely serious injuries, having your Dao heart gouged out and your Dao bone removed. Only an extremely weak soul remains, and it's incomplete as well. In order to let you be reborn, Zhang Wu tried everything. Because you're not an ordinary person, the conditions for rebirth are very difficult. The beings of the lower world cannot withstand the strength of your Dao will. But he didn't think it was difficult. He spent countless years and didn't care about the exhaustion of his life to find a suitable Dao body for you. Oh, it's more appropriate to call it a divine body. Don't say any more. Zhang Wu didn't want to talk about those days. It was as if he had been humiliated. He found 3 divine bodies for you, but you died prematurely. In the end, you were stranded in the divine wilderness and experienced the ancient war of the gods. Actually, you and Zhang Wu also participated in that war. Muri's tone was bleak. Qin Hao is one of the main culprits that caused the divine wilderness to be devoid of gods. 10,000 years ago, because the experts of other regions coveted a certain item in the divine wilderness, they wanted to seize the power of the heavenly Tao. In order to help Qin Hao recover his divine sense, Zhang Wu brought his incomplete self to serve the experts of other regions, participating in that battle. Because of this, Qin Hao died in the divine wilderness divine war. In fact, in the demon domain, Shi Ming wanted to tamper with Qin Hao's divine residence, causing a divine imprint to appear on his glabella. At that time, Shi Ming recognized Qin Hao, so he had an extremely strong killing intent, because Qin Hao destroyed the divine path of the divine wilderness. Later, Shi Ming restrained himself. He said that it was the will of the heavens and helped Qin Hao completely inherit Yin Ming's divine strength. He also helped him gather the demon emblem and temporarily control the evil power. After a long time, you wandered the myriad of worlds with an incomplete soul. You were despised, bullied, and exploited by other gods. Every time you went to a new world, you would be assimilated by the heavenly Tao, and your divine personality would be weakened continuously, until you fell into the divine wilderness. Zhang Wu no longer had the strength to take you out. He was suppressed here by the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness, and fell from a divine king to an ordinary person. This was the price. It was the price for Qin Hao to pay for his 4th reincarnation. In this reincarnation, Zhang Wu did not continue to accompany Qin Hao by his side and did not carefully watch over him like before. On the contrary, because of this, Qin Hao grew smoothly and soared to the sky, becoming increasingly uncontrollable. He met a benefactor, obtained an opportunity, and turned danger into safety time and time again until he inherited the divine strength of a divine wilderness expert and reached the nirvana realm. Although there were some accidents along the way, for example, the evil soul in the divine palace was extremely dangerous. However, Zhang Wu had already been killed by the imperial censor. The divine king armor was never obtained from the divine burial ruins. It was the armor of the divine king of the Archean divine world. The sunset arrow was also not a divine weapon that Dende had. It was a weapon that Zhang Wu gave him to protect himself and taught Qin how the sunset mental cultivation technique. Therefore, the source of the sunset mental cultivation technique was with Zhang Wu. As for why Qin Hao did not have the cultivation technique of the art of honest battle, it was because he could not master it. This was a set of archean divine path techniques that fixed one's godhood. If Qin Hao mastered it, he would no longer be an alchemy venerable, and this would very likely affect his awakening of the celestial source. After 4 reincarnations, you have become the supreme being of the East Continent that everyone envies. Do you know that behind every reincarnation, you are actually being carefully protected by a pair of invisible hands? Unfortunately, Muri looked at the white-haired Zhang Wu. For your 4th reincarnation, someone exhausted his own celestial source. However, there is no one behind him to protect him. You have said too much. Zhang Wu gritted his teeth. If he had hardened his heart and continued fighting at the sunset peak, he might have been able to force out Qin Hao's dormant celestial source and awaken the memories of 3 reincarnations. As for him, he had been weakened by layers of heavenly Tao and was already riddled with holes. It did not matter if he was reborn or not. It was unknown if he had suffered some kind of shock, but Qin Hao held his head with both hands and let out an ear-piercing scream. Why? His memories were blank. Why? He did not know anything. Wrong. He was not Dende of the East Continent. He did not belong to the divine wilderness. He and Zhang Wu had another homeland. Qin Hao, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me. The scream was too loud. Waves of evil aura that was filled with sin, resentment, and murder began to surge out from Qin Hao's shoulders. The terrifying aura sealed the area and seemed to want to devour everyone. Xiao Han suddenly panicked. This evil aura is not strong. Suppress it. You can do it. Suppress it. Zhang Wu did not know where he got the strength from. Without anyone's help, he stood up shakily and roared at the deranged Qin Hao. How could the resentment of a lowly creature from the lower domain compare to the divine power of a primordial divine venerable? There was no need for Shiming's help. As long as Qin Hao stimulated the power of the divine source, he could stop the evil aura from spreading and not be affected by it. Back off. If you don't want to die, all of you back off. Ancestor Mo Hai roared crazily at everyone. An extremely evil aura spread out. Waves of evil spirits began to sway behind Qin Hao. Crazy laughter and ear-piercing cries merged together, trying to drag people into the 9 serenities. Under the ultimate nirvana of the Emperor's Way, no one here could compete with Dende. The only one who could suppress Qin Hao, the sunset war god, had exhausted his divine source and caused his divine power to collapse. If he stayed here and was entangled by the evil spirits, he would die without leaving a trace. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Beams of Emperor's light frantically escaped into the distance, pulling an absolute distance away from Qin Hao. The sword cultivators of Zhuiying Sword Palace, Southern Region Sword Sect, Eastern Sea Shua Clan, Northern Region Phoenix Flower Sect, Central Region White Lunar Pavilion, and Immortal Sect. They came in an orderly manner, but fled as quickly as they could. Including the emperors, no one dared to approach the demonized Dende. He was like an abandoned lunatic roaring, but no one was willing to come forward to comfort him, except for Zhang Wu, who dragged his trembling body and used his almost dissipated hands to grab Qin Hao's arm. He roared angrily as if he wanted to use his voice to expel all the evil from Qin Hao's body. Xiao Han's eyes were filled with tears as she stood with Bao and Mu Yue. She was also one of the few people who remained here. Other than them, the other heroes of the prosperous East Continent all avoided them like the plague. Sigh. Muri let out a long sigh. It was all the sins of the divine palace. Under the stimulation of the evil spirits, Zhang Wu's 4th reincarnation, which he had painstakingly cultivated for Qin Hao, would probably die at the end of the Emperor's path. How sad. Boom. An extremely powerful beam of Emperor's Path exploded from the south. The terrifying radiance of the Great Path radiated across the entire sky. Turbulent shock waves roared through the void, causing huge rocks to fall from the sunset peak. Tens of thousands of palaces on the peak collapsed, and the war god temple on the peak also sank. Not good. Zhang Wu looked in that direction and sensed waves of overbearing auras tearing through the space and closing in on them in a frenzy. They were filled with billowing, murderous intent. At this critical juncture, the calamity that he was most worried about had arrived. Chapter 1928. Surging waves of Emperor's light swept towards the setting sun peak like a hurricane. The monstrous killing intent wanted to destroy the entire divine peak and bury everyone here, leaving not even a blade of grass behind. At this time, everyone saw that above the void in the distance, the dazzling light of battle intent rose and turned into a vast sky curtained to block and collide with the monstrous hurricane. However, the sky canopy only lasted for a few breaths before it was pierced through by the strong hurricane. The light particles that filled the sky were washed away. Along with the deafening collision of fist radiance, a few streams of flames vaguely streaked across the sky. The Tao ancestors with profound cultivation could clearly see that it was several golden crows that were pierced through by the rules of fist intent. Rumble. Space vibrated intensely. Soon, a broken chariot of a war god appeared in everyone's sight. It wasn't as dazzling as it used to be. Half of the broken chariot was missing, and one of its wheels was missing. It was being dragged by 5 gold crows, who had broken feathers and blood all over their bodies, towards the sunset peak, as if their lives depended on it. Along the way, Zhuge Xiu and Zhanlo stood on the shaking chariot. The sword of War God and the great path palm radiance kept bombarding behind them, as if they were chased by a group of evil spirits. Just as they were about to arrive at Sunset Peak, a dazzling spear light suddenly streaked across the sky, and a gorgeous stream of light blasted onto the chariot, causing a terrifying explosion. The broken chariot was blasted into smithereens by a single spear strike, and a spear light pierced through the bodies of the 2 golden crows before flying back to where it came from. Puff! Zhuge Xiu spat out a mouthful of blood and was knocked over by the spear radiance. Her hair was disheveled as she cursed at the Daqin army. She was dragged back by Zhanlo. Screech! There were originally 9 golden ravens, but now only 3 had returned safely. They were covered in wounds as they circled above Sunset Peak. They kept raising their heads to the sky and letting out sorrowful cries. They seemed to be crying to the master of the divine peak, asking the strongest person in the East Continent to kill those daring invaders. Unfortunately, Zhang Wu ignored the crying golden crows. Instead, he looked at Zhanlo and Zhuge Xiu. After all, they couldn't block it. It seemed that the power of Empress Ling Xian was far stronger than what the Sunset War God had imagined. The 2 unblemished great emperors formed a defensive barrier, but it didn't even last for 10 breaths before it was swept away. I'm sorry, I really can't block it. Zhanlo gasped for breath. Under his slightly messy hair, sweat flowed along the long scar on his forehead. Standing in front of Zhang Wu and looking at the sunset battle god, Lu wasn't too surprised. This was equivalent to weakening one's combat power. Their true self couldn't be at the peak level, and the emperors of the Dao Proving Realm weren't even as good as the 8th tier Dao Proving Realm. The Daqin came in full force. They were well prepared. Moreover, the Daqin army wasn't the only army on the other side. Behind the iron-blooded chariots, there were the shadow warriors of the Ghost Baron State, the disciples of the divine Herbalist Valley, and the remaining disciples of the divine Wind Palace. Many overlords of the East Continent and first-class forces formed a huge army of cultivators. Individually, any one of them was no weaker than the Shuo clan and Bai Yuexian. This was troublesome. Assemble. Roar. An order came from somewhere. Suddenly, the remaining War Immortal Guards quickly gathered into a battle formation. They supported the Twilight War Immortal Guards, who had almost dissipated and the orthodoxies of the Northland at the forefront. There were less than 10,000 war immortal guards left. They were originally wearing bright armor, but now they were covered in blood. 10 severely injured war immortal guards stood at the forefront of the battle formation. Pairs of resolute eyes stared at the army of Empress Ling Xian. Compared to the tide of death that was coming from the Qin imperial city, the remaining war immortal guards were insignificant. Even though there were only 10 war immortal guards left, and all of them were injured, at this moment, the majestic aura they exuded didn't weaken at all. The 10 war immortal guards looked at the valiant generals of the Daqin standing on the iron-blooded chariots. They didn't show any signs of weakness. In fact, they even exuded a sense of transcendence. This was because in their eyes, Empress Ling Xian's subordinates were no better than them. "Let's go," Bo Changji said to Zhuyin Emperor and Feng Lan. The two nodded and led their disciples to gather at the battle formation of the war immortal guards. It was ironic that the enemies who were fighting to the death a moment ago had become comrades on the battlefield in the next second. However, everyone knew that if they didn't join forces with the war immortal guards, they would be defeated one by Empress Ling Xian's army. Ancestral Master Hai, Emperor Bai, and Cripple who looked at each other with complicated expressions. Then, they silently followed the disciples of the Phoenix Flower 9 lineages and gathered at the war immortal guards. Qin Hao's current situation was unknown. But judging from the situation, the Twilight War immortal guards weren't Denda's match. Since that was the case, there was no harm in joining forces against Han Lingxian. The disciples of the orthodoxies weren't used to fighting side by side with the war immortal guards after a fierce battle. But it was better than being devoured by Empress Ling Xian. Immediately, the army of the Northland turned into a tide and gathered with the remaining war immortal guards. Suddenly, their battle formation increased greatly. They formed an extremely far defensive line, blocking the black tide of death. The enemies who were fighting to the death had become comrades who fought side by side. It was fate that made fools of people. "Sister Ling Xian, how have you been? You brought so many people to see me and Qin Hao. Are you inviting the monarch of Daqin back?" Zhuge Xiu and Zhan Lu supported the old Twilight War immortal guards. At this moment, Zhan Wu shouted at the Black Tide army opposite them. "Denda wants to return to the Qin Imperial Palace. I will welcome him back." A majestic female voice came from the vast Black Tide and resounded in the void of the Twilight Peak. Iron blood chariots were lined up on both sides. The Black Tide of Death parted to form a wide path in the middle. A dazzling, gigantic Empress throne that was dozens of feet tall slowly moved out. On the throne stood the majestic figure of the Empress. She was peerless in her generation. The Emperor's light radiated from her body and shot thousands of miles into the sky. Her majestic aura reached the 9 heavens. She was the current Empress Ling Xian of the East Continent. She was as famous as the Twilight War immortal guards. Zhan Wu gazed ahead and fell on the dazzling throne. Han Ling Xian's appearance hadn't changed much. After hundreds of years, she still looked like an 18 or 19-year-old girl. Her skin was as white as snow, and she was beautiful. However, compared to the naive and romantic girl of the past, the Empress Ling Xian in front of him was full of the aura of a queen. Her eyes that overlooked the world made people not dare to look up at her. In the face of such a peerless queen, the people of the 5 realms, including the Emperor, didn't dare to have any improper thoughts. They only felt awe and fear. "Haha, I haven't seen you for hundreds of years." Brother Zhan Wu has become a white-haired old man. Even the aura of the Twilight War immortal guards has weakened. It looks like you won't be able to hold on for much longer. A smile appeared on Han Lingshuan's beautiful face. Under her luxurious palace robe, she strode down the incomparably tall steps of the divine throne step by step until she was level with the sunset battle god. This was respect. Although Zhan Wu was about to dissipate, the Twilight War immortal should still be given the respect he deserved. "Han Ling Xian, I won't hand Qin Hao over to you." Zhan Wu's eyes narrowed and emitted an incomparably sharp luster. He knew what Han Ling Xian was scheming. She coveted Qin Hao's divine residence and wanted to snatch the divine origin of the primordial alchemy venerate. She wanted to obtain the divine fruits of the great Tao with the body of an ant from the lower realm. Whether I hand it over to you or not, it's not up to Brother Zhangwu to decide, Han Lingxian said with a smile. Han Lingxian smiled faintly. Her smile seemed to have some kind of magical power. Anyone who saw her smile would find it hard to control their mind and willingly fall under her emperor's skirt. War immortal. If you hand Dendi over to King Lingxian, you might still be able to die with a great reputation. Otherwise, the next label of treachery will be on your head. Even if you aren't afraid of going down in infamy for 10,000 years, shouldn't you consider the group of divine guards under you? Among them, there's also Commander Liu, a plump middle-aged man wearing a nine-dragon robe appeared beside Empress Lingxian. However, there was an absolute distance between the two of them. Grandson of the Xianlong. Zhuge Xiu glared at the middle-aged man and shouted. This person was the Xianlong holy man. Stop barking, Zhuge Xiu. If Lu Tong destroys his own imperial path, Empress Lingxian can still spare his life. However, you won't have such an honor. Old man will kill you and put you into my Xianlong Dao furnace to be refined until you die. And Meng Xiang. The Xianlong holy man roared hoarsely. The Xianlong lineage died at the hands of Zhuge Xiu and Meng Xiang. However, where was Meng Xiang? The Xianlong holy man looked at the divine war guards of the Sunset Peak, but did not see Meng Xiang's shadow. Could it be that he died in battle? Indeed, he was blessed. They were at the pinnacle of the true self and the pinnacle of the Tao. The Empress was not any weaker than the people around Han Lingxian. At most, they would fight until the divine wilderness no longer had an emperor's path. 10,000 years ago, the divine path was lost. 10,000 years later, the continent would no longer have an emperor's path. Zhangwu did not feel that it was a pity. For Qin Hao, you are truly ruthless. However, not everyone in the East Continent is like you, Sunset Battle God, Senior Dao Ancestor, Zhuiying Swordmaster, and Paragon Fenglan. This Tharch has admired all of you for a long time. All of you are the same as me, children of the divine wilderness. Are all of you really going to risk the divine wilderness losing its Tharch heritage for an outsider? Han Lingxian looked at the Taoist ancestor. I don't want to force you to help me. As long as you watch from afar, after I destroy Zhangwu and the Sunset Peak, the Taoist sect will still be the Taoist sect of the South. The Sword Palace will still be the Sword Palace of the Middle Continent, and the Phoenix Flower Palace will still be the only overlord of the North. What do you think? Empress Lingxian smiled like a spring breeze. Uncle knew that they did not need to do anything, including the Celestial Sect, the Shuo clan, and the White Moon Pavilion. As long as they stayed out of the matter, they could preserve their Tao and pass it on from generation to generation. I should have been buried, but because of my unfulfilled wish, I entered the peak and slept for 1,000 years. That day, Qin Hao came to the Tao Mountain and let me feel the aura of an old friend. I don't care whether he is a person of the divine wilderness or an outsider. I only want the aura of an old friend to remain on his body. If he dies, all the beautiful memories in my memory will become void. The Taoist ancestor's words hid a profound meaning that was difficult to understand. In short, whether he was a native of the divine wilderness or Qin Hao was an outsider, since the eastern sky and Shermu sent him to the Tao Mountain, he was a member of the Tao Mountain. What reason did Uncle have to reject the wishes of two childhood friends? This was the arrangement of the divine wilderness heavenly Tao. When Marshal Aunt Feng Qi left, she said that no matter what wrong I did in the past, she hoped that I would not make the same mistake again. Feng Lan's reply was frank and direct. What a pity. Han Lingxian shook her head and finally looked at the Zhuiying Great Emperor. She saw that he was standing in the North Territory's front line like an immovable pillar. Han Lingxuan's disappointment deepened. You don't know how to appreciate kindness. Behind Han Lingxian, a young man with 9 emperor rings under his feet said fiercely. This person was the new lord of the divine firmament palace and also the descendant of Shun Qian. A swordsman should not be afraid of the wind and waves. Ha ha! Zhan Wu laughed and pointed at the messy formation of the Empress's personal guards. He said, "Look, this is your Empress. Han Ling Xian. Oh, Han Ling Xian, you didn't expect this, did you? I have indeed failed, but the one who lost was not Qin Hao. Even though he has not found the true heart of the source of God, even though he has become like this, which one of you can suppress him?" At the end of the Emperor's path was nirvana. It was the last hurdle to the divine Tao. After stepping over it, one would be on par with the heavenly Tao, even if one's mind was not normal. Who had the ability to suppress a nirvana cultivator? This, the valley master of the Shinong Valley, was speechless. When the Xinlong holy man saw Qin Hao's evil aura, he silently retreated a distance and hid behind the valley master of the Shinong Valley. One move easily tore apart the unblemished great emperor. If he asked himself honestly, the Xinlong holy man was not as strong as the Daqin general. Sometimes it was as delicate as a beautiful woman. Sometimes it was as rough as a brute. Sometimes it was as young as a teenager. And sometimes it revealed the outline of an old man. It was as if countless souls had formed this soul body. It possessed the memories of tens of thousands of people, as well as the obsessions of tens of thousands of people. Of course, it was also filled with endless sin. Shanghua. Muri looked at the face of the chief disciple of the Divine Palace's Daozong Peak. Even without the imperial body, at this moment, Muri's spiritual soul erupted with an extremely terrifying power. The murderous aura turned into a whirlwind, forcing Dahai and the others to slide repeatedly. They couldn't stop. "Sister Muri, it's been a long time. Muri, why don't you kneel when you see me? Sister Muri, I miss you so much. Come and accompany us. Muri, I finally see you again." Different voices frequently came out of Shenghua's mouth. Along with this, his face also changed from Shenghua to Migrez, and from Migrez to Old Taoist Yunyi. Many divine palace disciples of the same generation as Muri appeared frequently. Finally, Muri saw Eastern Sky. At this moment, Muri's spiritual soul shed tears, and her eyes were blood red. Although she didn't have the imperial body, everyone seemed to hear the sound of fingers piercing flesh and blood in her palms. "This is..." Emperor Bai and the others were suddenly hit in the face by the monstrous evil aura. The aura of 10,000 sins was several times stronger than that of Qin Hao. For a moment, all of their faces changed. What a terrible, evil pressure. Great Emperor Jing set off a surging sword vortex around him, which barely resisted the invasion of the evil aura. Tao Zu stood silently to the side, his eyes closed fiercely. He gripped the dust Taoist so tightly that his fingers turned pale. "We pay our respects to the evil god." Crash! 100,000 of the Empress's personal troops, the Daqin generals on the chariot, including Valley Master Shinon, the Ghost Wilderness Grandmaster, and the Xianlong Holy Man, all knelt down in front of Shenghua's spiritual body. The evil god, a real god, belonged to the divine wilderness and should be worshipped by the common people. "We are finally together again, Qin Hao." The evil spirit smiled at Qin Hao in the appearance of Eastern Sky. No matter how far they ran, the people of the Divine Palace would eventually be reunited. It was like a curse that no one could separate the disciples of the Divine Palace. Even in hell, they would be together. The heads of the evil spirits swayed behind Qin Hao uncontrollably, and all of them leaned in the direction of Eastern Sky, as if they were summoned. Qin Hao tried to restrain himself. Through his clothes, a group of demonic symbols could be seen flashing on his shoulder, exuding a supreme demonic aura.